A few years ago, I left a friend stranded in the middle of nowhere, and I've never told anyone. To this day, it's one of the worst things I've ever done. I think about it more than I should, and every time I do, I feel this wave of guilt so heavy it's like I can't breathe. I've convinced myself that what happened wasn't entirely my fault, but deep down, I know that's a lie. Here's how it went down. Back in my mid-20s, I was part of this friend group that used to take road trips together. Every few weekends, we'd pile into someone's car and drive to the beach, the mountains, or whatever random spot seemed fun. There were 5 of us, 4 easygoing, adventurous people. And then, Jake. Jake was that friend everyone has, the one no one really likes, but no one has the guts to cut loose. He was always making passive-aggressive comments, picking fights over dumb things, and generally just being exhausting to be around. But he'd been part of the group for years, and it felt easier to tolerate him than deal with the awkward fallout of pushing him out. One weekend, we decided to go hiking at this trail about 2 hours out of town. I didn't even want to go. Things have been tense with Jake lately, and I knew a long car ride with him would be a nightmare. But the others convinced me to come, saying it would be fun and good for everyone. It wasn't. The trip started off badly, with Jake complaining about the music, the route, and even the snacks we brought. By the time we reached the trailhead, my patience was hanging by a thread. But I smiled, clenched my jaw, and told myself to suck it up for the sake of the group. The hike itself was brutal. Jake whined the entire way up, making snide comments about how slow we were moving, how hot it was, and how someone, meaning me, should have picked a different trail. I tried to laugh it off, but it was like every word out of his mouth was a needle poking at my last nerve. About halfway through the hike, we reached this lookout point with a view of the whole valley below. It was gorgeous. One of those moments that's supposed to make everything feel worth it. But Jake, being Jake, found a way to ruin it. He started griping about how overrated the view was and making fun of one of the other guys for taking pictures. And that's when I snapped. I didn't yell or make a scene. I just stood up, turned to the others, and said, "I'm heading back to the car." One of the guys asked if I was okay, and I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, just tired. I'll meet you all there." Jake, being the jerk that he was, decided to come with me. I think he thought I was leaving because I was annoyed with the others, and he wanted to play the whole us against them game. Whatever his reason, I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from the group, and unfortunately, that meant being stuck with Jake for the walk back. The entire hike down, he kept talking about himself, about how much everyone else sucked, about how he couldn't wait to get out of this boring town and move somewhere cooler. I don't even know how I managed to keep my mouth shut the whole time. It was like every step I took was another reminder of how much I hated being around him. When we finally reached the car, something inside me snapped. I stood there, looking at the parking lot, the empty road stretching out in front of me, and I made a decision I didn't even realize I was making. "Hey," I said, turning to Jake. "I forgot something back on the trail. I'll be right back. Can you wait here?" He shrugged and sat down on a rock by the car, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. And before I could second-guess myself, I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. At first, I told myself I was just going to drive to the nearest gas station and clear my head. I needed a break from him, just for a few minutes. But as the road stretched on and the mountains faded in the rearview mirror, I realized I wasn't going back. I drove all the way home. The whole time, my phone buzzed with texts and calls from the others. I ignored every single one. I don't know if they thought something had happened to me, or if they just assumed I'd ditched them. Either way, I didn't care. All I knew was that I was free. Free from Jake, free from the trip, free from the weight of pretending I liked someone I hated. It wasn't until the next morning that I checked my messages. There were a bunch from the group, mostly confused texts asking where I went and if I was okay. But the ones from Jake? Those were brutal. "WTF, where are you? Are you seriously ditching me? Enjoy being a selfish *TCH. Apparently, he had to walk several miles to find another hiker with a phone and call someone to pick him up. I never asked for the details and no one ever told me. All I know is that when the group got back to town, Jake was furious, and rightfully so. He blocked me on everything, which was honestly a relief. The others didn't say much about what happened. They knew I wasn't going to explain myself, and to be fair, no one seemed too upset about Jake's dramatic exit from our lives. It was like we all silently agreed that maybe it was time for him to go. But that doesn't make what I did okay. I've never told anyone the truth, that I left Jake on purpose, knowing full well how far we were from the nearest help. I tell myself that he deserved it, that he brought it on himself by being a jerk. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about the look on his face when I drove away. How completely clueless he was, how sure he was that I'd be back any second. And the truth is, I'm not sure if I did it because I hated him or because I hated the part of myself that kept putting up with people like him. I don't know if I'll ever tell anyone what really happened that day. Maybe I'll carry this secret with me forever, or maybe one day I'll tell the group and hope they understand. But for now, it's mine to keep. And every time I think about it, I wonder if I'd do it again. I'm scared of the answer. This happened during my senior year, just a few weeks before graduation, and it still feels surreal. It's the kind of story that people would think you made up if you weren't there to witness it firsthand. It's known around school as the Great Principal Golf Cart Heist. Our school had this little electric golf cart that the administrators used to get around campus. They'd use it to haul boxes, make security rounds, or chase down kids who were ditching class. It was this ugly, ancient thing, held together by duct tape and hope, but for some reason, everyone was obsessed with it. Students talked about borrowing it for years, but no one ever had the guts to actually pull it off until Ryan came along. Ryan was a legend in the making. He was the kid who once brought a blow-up pool to the cafeteria and ate lunch floating in it. The kind of guy who turned bad ideas into worse decisions, but somehow you always wanted to be around him to see what would happen. So when Ryan casually announced during lunch one day, "I'm taking the golf cart today," everyone thought he was joking. Spoiler, he wasn't. Now, Ryan's plan was simple, but like all his plans, it was also incredibly stupid. He figured the best time to steal the golf cart would be during 6th period, when half the teachers were too tired to care and the school security guard, Mr. Landers, would be busy sitting in his office watching YouTube videos. The only problem? Ryan didn't know how to drive. But like always, Ryan shrugged off the details. "It's a golf cart," he said confidently. "How hard can it be?" So, right after lunch, Ryan grabbed his backpack, rounded up a few of us to be his crew, and we headed toward the maintenance shed where the golf cart was usually parked. His plan? Take the cart, drive it through the main courtyard, and park it in the middle of the football field like some kind of victory monument. It sounded so stupid that we had to see it happen. When we got to the maintenance shed, the golf cart was sitting there like it was waiting for us, keys still in the ignition. And in true Ryan fashion, instead of playing it cool, he threw his arms up like a NASCAR driver who just won a race and shouted, "Victory is mine!" loud enough for half the school to hear. I tried to tell him, "Dude, maybe keep it down?" But Ryan wasn't listening. He hopped into the driver's seat, patted the dashboard like it was a trusty horse, and said, "Get in, boys. We ride at dawn." We all piled in. 3 of us crammed into the tiny cart, backpacks dangling off the sides, looking like a gang of idiots. Ryan twisted the key, and, miraculously, the thing sputtered to life with a low, electric hum. "Let's go!" Ryan shouted, slamming his foot down on the pedal. The golf cart lurched forward at approximately 2 miles per hour. For a moment, the whole thing was more funny than impressive. Here we were, sitting in this creaky old cart, moving slower than a kid on a tricycle. But Ryan was having the time of his life. He leaned into the steering wheel like he was driving a getaway car, squinting dramatically at the empty courtyard ahead of us. That's when disaster struck. Halfway through the courtyard, Ryan decided to show off. He jerked the steering wheel hard to the left, trying to do a donut, which of course the golf cart was not built to do. The thing swerved, wobbled, and then tipped. In an instant, the cart was on its side, and the 3 of us went tumbling out in a heap of backpacks, arms, and legs. Ryan popped up first, grinning like this was all part of the plan. "Nailed it," he shouted, even though we were all sprawled out on the pavement like roadkill. That's when we heard the voice. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" It was Mr. Landers, the security guard, and he was not amused. He came storming toward us, his face redder than the school fire alarm. Ryan, to his credit, didn't even flinch. He threw his hands in the air and said, "It's okay, Mr. Landers. We're seniors." Mr. Landers did not share Ryan's enthusiasm. Get that thing off the ground. Now, he barked, pointing at the overturned cart. We scrambled to lift the cart back onto its wheels, trying not to laugh. Ryan was still acting like this was some kind of heroic mission, wiping imaginary sweat off his brow and saying, "Phew, close one," like we'd narrowly escaped death instead of mildly inconveniencing a golf cart. But before we could hop back in and drive away, the principal showed up. And not just the principal, the assistant principal, 2 teachers, and the janitor all rolled up at the same time like some kind of disciplinary SWAT team. "What's going on here?" the principal asked, glaring at Ryan. Without missing a beat, Ryan gave him the most ridiculous excuse I've ever heard in my life. "We were doing a safety check." I swear, the silence that followed was deafening. Even Mr. Landers looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The principal folded his arms. "A safety check?" Ryan nodded earnestly. "Yep. Gotta make sure the OL cart's in working order. You know, can't be too careful." I thought for sure we were done for. Expelled. Suspended. Something. But to my shock, the principal just let out this long, exhausted sigh and said, "Ryan, put the cart back. Now." And that was it. No detention, no punishment. Just a stern look and an order to return the cart to the shed. We drove the golf cart, very slowly, back to its parking spot, with Mr. Landers following us the whole way like a babysitter who'd had enough of our nonsense. When we finally parked it, Ryan gave the cart a little pat on the hood and whispered, "You served us well, old friend." To this day, I have no idea how we didn't get in more trouble for that stunt. But after we left the cart and walked back to class, Ryan threw his arm around my shoulder and said, "Legendary, right?" And honestly, he wasn't wrong. So, let me tell you about the time I almost died because of a bag of rice. Yeah, not skydiving, not a wild animal encounter, just good old, innocent-looking rice. I still can't believe how close I came to checking out because of something you're supposed to eat. It all started when I decided to do a Costco run. You know, one of those trips where you tell yourself you're only going to grab a couple of things, but somehow you leave with a cart full of bulk everything. I'd recently started cooking more at home, so I thought, hey, why not grab one of those giant 20-pound bags of rice? It's a good deal. Seemed like a reasonable decision at the time. What could go wrong with rice, right? Fast forward to later that day. I get home, and I'm lugging all my groceries inside, arms full, refusing to make multiple trips because I have pride when I realize the rice bag is still sitting in the trunk of my car. Now, if you've never dealt with a 20-pound bag of rice, let me tell you, it's deceptively heavy. Not, oh, I need a forklift heavy, but just awkward enough to make you think, I got this, when you absolutely do not got this. So there I was standing in my driveway, tired, sweating, and way too lazy to carry the rice up the stairs like a normal person. Instead of taking my time, I decided to throw the bag over my shoulder and haul it inside in one trip. Because why waste time when you can risk your life for no reason? I sling the bag up onto my shoulder like I'm some kind of rice-carrying champion. Everything's going fine until I reach the stairs. And that's when things start to unravel. I'm halfway up, feeling pretty proud of myself, when the bag shifts. All that rice, 20 pounds of it, shifts to one side like a sandbag, and suddenly my balance is gone. I stumble forward, and before I know it, I'm toppling down the stairs with a bag of rice still slung over my shoulder. Now, when you're falling with a bag of rice, everything happens in slow motion. 1 second, you're upright, and the next, you're doing some kind of twisted somersault down a flight of stairs, clutching a giant sack of grains. I try to catch myself, but my feet slipped out from under me, and I went down hard. I landed on my back with a thud, and the rice bag, because it's a jerk, decided to follow through. It rolled off my shoulder and smashed into my chest, knocking the wind out of me. For a moment, I just lay there, gasping for air, staring up at the ceiling, thinking, did I just get murdered by rice? The worst part? My phone was in my pocket, but I couldn't move. Every time I tried to sit up, the weight on my chest made it impossible to catch my breath. I started to panic, thinking this is it. This is how I go. They're going to find me dead at the bottom of the stairs with a giant sack of rice. And people are going to laugh at my obituary. And then my mind did what it always does in stressful situations. It made things worse. I suddenly remembered all those stories about internal injuries. You know, the ones where someone falls, thinks they're fine, and then just dies later from a ruptured spleen or some internal bleeding they didn't notice. Lying there, crushed by rice, I thought, yep, this is one of those stories now. After a minute or two of panic breathing, I finally managed to roll the bag off my chest. It hit the floor with a dull thud, like it knew it had almost succeeded in taking me out. I sat up slowly, every part of my body screaming in pain. My back hurt, my ribs felt bruised, and I was pretty sure I'd pulled something in my shoulder. But I was alive. Barely. When I finally stood up, I looked down at the bag of rice and felt a weird mix of anger and respect. The thing had almost killed me, and all because I was too lazy to take 2 trips or just carry it properly. Here's the kicker. After all that, I opened the damn bag later and discovered it had a tear in it from the fall. So I spent the next 20 minutes sweeping up rice from every corner of my entryway, muttering curses under my breath. To this day, I still find random grains of rice hiding in weird places, like little reminders of how close I came to being a headline. So yeah, the moral of the story is don't underestimate anything, especially rice. It's always the dumb stuff that sneaks up on you. 1 second, you're making a Costco run, and the next, you're fighting for your life at the bottom of a staircase, wondering how you got outsmarted by a sack of grains. These days, I take my time with groceries. I make multiple trips. I use both hands. And I never carry anything heavy upstairs without thinking twice. Because if rice can almost kill me, what chance do I have against anything more dangerous? Stay safe out there, folks. The smallest things will take you out if you're not careful. And honestly, the last thing you want is to be remembered as that person who lost a fight to a bag of rice. This one still gives me chills, and no matter how much I try to forget it, it stays with me. I can't explain what happened, and honestly, I don't know if I even want to. But every now and then, something reminds me of that night, and it's like I'm right back there again. It happened about 6 months ago. I was house sitting for a friend who lives out in the countryside. She had gone on vacation for a week and asked me to watch her place and feed her cat. I figured it would be easy, a few days in a cozy little house. Just me, her cat, and some quiet time. I needed the break anyway, so I said yes. The first couple of nights were peaceful. I read books, watched movies, and enjoyed the silence. There's something nice about being disconnected from everything for a while. But on the 3rd night, things started to get weird. It was a little after midnight, and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone. The house was dead silent, except for the occasional sound of the wind brushing against the windows. That's when I heard it, a knock at the door. At first, I thought I imagined it. Who would be out here this late? But then it came again. 3 knocks. Soft, deliberate, like someone knew I was inside and wanted me to answer. I froze. Something about the knocks felt wrong. Not urgent, not frantic, just patient. Like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the door from across the room, waiting for it to happen again. And it did. 3 more knocks. I got up, heart pounding, and slowly made my way to the front door. I peeked through the peephole, expecting to see someone standing on the porch. But there was no one there, just darkness and the faint outline of the trees swaying in the night breeze. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just the wind knocking a branch against the house or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Those knocks had been deliberate. Someone was out there. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and went back to bed, hoping it wouldn't happen again. But just as I started to drift off to sleep, 3 knocks. This time, they were louder. I shot out of bed, my heart racing. The cat, who had been sleeping at the foot of the bed, was now standing in the doorway, her fur bristling, staring into the hallway with wide, unblinking eyes. She let out a low growl, something I didn't even know cats could do, and backed away from the door. That was when I realized the knocks weren't coming from the front door anymore. They were coming from inside the house. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. The hallway was empty, and the house was silent again. But I knew what I had heard. Those knocks, they were close. Too close. I walked slowly down the hallway, every nerve in my body on edge, checking every door, every corner. Nothing. The house was empty, just as it had been before. But the feeling didn't leave. I felt like I was being watched, like something was standing just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. And then I heard the sound of footsteps. They were soft, slow, and deliberate, coming from the other side of the house. I froze, gripping my phone like a lifeline, and strained to listen. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I whispered, "Hello." Nothing. I took a step forward, trying to keep my breathing steady, and that's when I saw it. The back door was open, just slightly, enough to see the night beyond, but not enough to know what had opened it. I knew for a fact that I had locked it earlier, and yet there it was, swaying gently in the wind. I should have run right then and there, but something about the open door, it was almost hypnotic. I took another step toward it, my mind screaming at me to stop, and as I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, and every light in the house flickered, just for a moment, but long enough to make my skin crawl. The cat hissed and bolted under the bed, leaving me alone in the hallway with the door still vibrating from the impact. I don't remember getting back to bed. I don't remember falling asleep. But somehow, I woke up the next morning, the sun streaming through the windows like nothing had happened. The cat was curled up at the foot of the bed, purring softly, as if the night before had been a dream. But it wasn't. When I went to check the back door, it was still locked. The house looked the same, nothing out of place, no sign that anyone had been there. But I knew. I felt it. Something had been in that house with me, watching, waiting. I packed up my things and left that morning, cutting my stay short. I didn't even bother telling my friend about what had happened. I knew she wouldn't believe me. How do you explain something like that? Even now, back in the city, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was there that night is still watching. This happened about a year ago, and I still can't figure it out. Every time I try to tell myself it was just a dream, some small detail will pop back into my head. Something I know couldn't have been a dream. And the worst part is I think whatever happened that night isn't done with me yet. It started with a phone call. It was late, 2:43 a.m. to be exact. I remember that number because I checked the screen, confused as to why anyone would be calling me at that hour. The caller ID just showed unknown. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something about that night felt different. I was already half awake, and against my better judgment, I swiped to answer. "Hello?" I mumbled. At first, there was silence, just a soft crackle of static on the other end. I was about to hang up when I heard it, this strange, raspy breathing like someone was standing just too close to the phone. And then, in a low whisper, they said, "I'm outside." A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, and I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. For a second, I thought it was a prank, someone screwing with me. But the voice, it didn't sound playful. It sounded off, like whoever was speaking wasn't quite human. I jumped out of bed and went to the window, pulling the curtain back just a crack. The street outside was dead quiet, bathed in that eerie orange glow from the streetlights. I scanned the road, the sidewalk, even my driveway. No one was there. Just as I was about to close the curtain, I saw something. At the far edge of the street, standing perfectly still beneath the flickering streetlight, was a figure. It wasn't moving, just standing there watching. It was hard to tell from that distance, but the figure looked tall, way too tall. And there was something wrong about the way it stood. Its head was cocked to one side, like it didn't quite understand how to hold it upright. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe some random person out for a walk. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Then my phone buzzed again. I looked down to see a new text message, also from unknown. The message was simple. "Let me in." A wave of cold fear washed over me, and I dropped my phone like it had burned me. I backed away from the window, my pulse racing. I knew. I had locked the front door before going to bed. But now I couldn't shake the horrible feeling that somehow it wasn't locked anymore. I crept down the hallway, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The house felt too quiet, like the kind of silence that comes when everything is holding still, waiting. When I reached the front door, I hesitated. I didn't want to open it, not even to check the lock. But I had to know. I leaned in, holding my breath, and slowly turned the knob to test it. It was unlocked. My heart dropped into my stomach. I was sure, absolutely sure, I had locked it before going to bed. I twisted the deadbolt, locking it tight, and stepped back, trying to calm my racing heart. Then the knocking started. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. The sound was gentle, almost polite, like whoever was on the other side didn't need to force their way in. They just wanted me to open the door. I stood there, frozen, staring at the doorknob as if it might turn on its own. Then the knock came again. 3 steady taps, perfectly spaced like a clock ticking down to something. My phone buzzed. Another text from unknown. "Let me in. I know you're there." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I backed away from the door, heart slamming against my ribcage, and dialed 911. The line connected, and a calm, automated voice said, "We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please hang up and try again." I stared at the phone in disbelief. My signal was fine, full bars. There was no reason the call shouldn't have gone through. Then the knocking stopped. The silence was worse. It was heavy, pressing down on me from every direction, like the air itself was waiting for something. I backed further into the house, clutching the phone like a lifeline. And then, just as I thought it was over, I heard it, the sound of the doorknob turning. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The knob rattled once, twice, and then slowly began to turn. I don't know how I did it, but I bolted toward the back of the house, my mind racing with panic. I locked myself in the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and throwing my weight against it. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message read, "I'm inside." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I sat there in the dark, clutching the phone, waiting for whatever was in the house to find me. I could hear soft footsteps moving through the hallway, slow and deliberate, like whoever or whatever. It knew exactly where I was. The footsteps stopped just outside the bathroom door. For what felt like hours, I sat there in the dark, waiting for the knob to turn, for the door to open, for the nightmare to end. But nothing happened. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, and the house fell silent once again. When the sun finally came up, I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped out, expecting to find the front door wide open, or maybe something worse. But everything looked normal. The door was locked. The house was quiet. There was no sign that anyone had been there at all. But when I picked up my phone, there was one last message waiting for me. "See you soon." I haven't slept right since that night. And every now and then, when I'm alone in the house, I think I hear soft footsteps in the hallway, just beyond the door. I never answer late-night calls anymore, and I always keep the bathroom door unlocked, just in case. I never thought my life would take the kind of turn you only see in bad TV dramas. It's the kind of thing you tell yourself could never happen to you, until it does. And now, here I am, sitting with the fallout of the worst mistake I've ever made. This happened about a year ago. I was 22, aimlessly bouncing between part-time jobs and trying to figure out what to do with my life. My best friend, Tyler, had it more together, or at least it seemed that way. He'd just gotten promoted at his job, was in a stable relationship, and had moved into his own apartment. Meanwhile, I was still crashing in my parents' place, waiting for some kind of clarity about my future. Tyler's family was like a second family to me. I'd grown up at their house, spent more nights there than I could count. His mom, Karen, was always cool. One of those moms who was easy to talk to, always interested in what we were up to. She was in her mid-40s, divorced for a few years, and took really good care of herself. She had this calm, confident energy that made people feel at ease around her. Yeah, she was attractive. We all knew it, everyone did. She had that kind of beauty that felt effortless. But she was Tyler's mom. There was a rule, an unspoken one, but still a rule. You just don't go there. Ever. And yet, here I am. It started on a random weekend when Tyler asked me to swing by his mom's house to drop off some boxes he didn't have room for at his place. "She'll be home, so just leave them with her," he told me. I didn't think much of it, just another favor between friends. When I got there, Karen was in the kitchen, drinking a glass of wine. She greeted me with her usual warm smile and invited me to stay for a drink. I figured one glass wouldn't hurt, so I sat down and we started chatting. It felt normal, casual, just catching up. But as the night went on, something shifted. We were sitting a little closer, laughing a little longer. The wine flowed a bit too easily, and suddenly, the conversation wasn't just small talk. She started asking me personal questions about my relationships, about how I was really doing. It felt different, more intimate than it should have been. At some point, I mentioned how lost I felt, how it seemed like everyone around me had their lives together except me. Karen gave me this soft, understanding smile and reached out to touch my hand. "You're doing better than you think," she said quietly. "Sometimes it just takes a little longer to figure it all out." Her hand lingered on mine, and in that moment, the air between us felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't quite explain. I knew I should have pulled away, made some excuse to leave, but I didn't. She gave me this look, like she was waiting for me to make the first move, and like a complete idiot, I leaned in and kissed her. For a split second, I thought she might push me away, tell me to stop, but she didn't. She kissed me back, and just like that, every line we weren't supposed to cross shattered. One kiss turned into two, and before I knew it, we were in her bedroom. It was fast, messy, and over way too soon. Afterward, we lay there in silence, both of us knowing how badly we'd just screwed up. Karen broke the silence first. "We don't have to make this complicated," she said softly. "It can just be our little secret." I told myself it was a one-time thing, a stupid, heat-of-the-moment mistake. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, Karen and I kept texting. At first, it was innocent, just checking in, saying hi. But it didn't take long for things to get flirty again. And the next thing I knew, I was back at her house. Then again, and again. It became this secret thing. We were careful, always making sure Tyler was nowhere around. It felt like we were sneaking around in some twisted version of a relationship. I knew it was wrong. Every part of me knew it, but I couldn't stop. The secrecy, the danger of it, the way she made me feel, it was addictive. The guilt, though, that never went away. Every time I saw Tyler, it gnawed at me. We'd hang out, play video games, grab beers, and the whole time, I'd feel like I was carrying this giant secret that was slowly crushing me. I told myself I'd stop seeing Karen, that it wasn't worth risking my friendship with Tyler. But every time she texted me, I caved. Then everything blew up in the worst way possible. It was a Friday night, and Tyler had invited me to his place to hang out. I went over, thinking it would be a normal night, beer, games, maybe some bad pizza. But as soon as I walked in, I knew something was off. Tyler was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone with this unreadable expression. "Hey man," I said cautiously. "Everything okay?" He looked up at me, and the look in his eyes made my stomach drop. "Why the hell is my mom texting you at 2 a.m?" he asked, his voice cold and sharp. My heart stopped. I knew right then that it was over. There was no talking my way out of this one. It's not what you think," I stammered, but even I knew how weak that sounded. Tyler stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "How long has this been going on?" I tried to explain, tried to say it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, but he wasn't hearing any of it. He cut me off, his voice full of anger and disbelief. "You were hooking up with my mom behind my back?" There was nothing I could say to make it right. I stood there, frozen, as Tyler shook his head and walked to the door. "Get out," he said quietly. "We're done." I left without another word. That was the last time I saw Tyler. He blocked me on everything, deleted my number, unfriended me on social media, the whole deal. I haven't heard from him since. Karen tried to reach out a few times after that, but I ignored her. It didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. It's been almost a year now, and I still think about it every day, how easily I threw away a decade of friendship for something that never should have happened. I lost one of the most important people in my life because I couldn't control myself. And the worst part? I saw it coming the whole time. I knew exactly where it was headed, and I let it happen anyway. So yeah, that's my story. I don't expect sympathy, and I sure as hell don't expect forgiveness. I know I messed up. I crossed a line I never should have crossed, and now I have to live with that. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some mistakes stick with you forever. And no matter how much time passes, you can't take them back. Once the damage is done, it's done. We'd been together for nearly 5 years. Not quite married, but close enough that our lives were completely tangled together. Shared bills, Sunday morning coffee routines, knowing each other's Netflix passwords by heart. It felt easy, comfortable, like home. I never thought in a million years that he would be the one to destroy it all. But betrayal doesn't knock on the front door. It slips in quietly, wearing the same smile you've fallen in love with. The first shift was so subtle, I almost missed it. It wasn't a sudden fight or a dramatic change. It was quieter than that. We used to spend the evenings together, talking, laughing, binge-watching whatever trash TV show we were hooked on at the moment. But one day, he just stopped engaging. He'd sit next to me, scrolling endlessly on his phone, barely responding when I tried to talk to him. "Everything okay?" I asked once, placing my hand on his arm. He gave me a quick, distracted smile. "Yeah, just tired. Work's been crazy." It sounded reasonable. I nodded and let it go because, well, what else could I do? Everyone gets tired. Everyone has off days. But those off days turn into weeks, and those weeks turn into months. He stopped initiating conversations, stopped planning date nights, and even the small touches, hand-holding, kisses on the forehead, started to vanish. I told myself it was just a phase. I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing. You don't want to believe that someone you love is slipping away from you. Then came the phone. God, the phone. It's always the damn phone, isn't it? He started keeping it close, closer than he ever had before. It was always face down on the table, notifications off, locked with a password that I didn't know. He'd take it with him everywhere, even into the bathroom, which was something he never used to do. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, I saw him smiling at his screen. This soft, familiar smile I hadn't seen in a long time. My stomach twisted. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He quickly locked the screen and set the phone down, face down, of course. "Nothing. Just a stupid meme," he said, already pulling the covers over himself. I didn't ask any more questions, but the seed of doubt was planted. And once it's there, it grows. The late nights started soon after that. He used to come straight home after work, but now there were always meetings that ran late or work drinks with his coworkers. "Don't wait up," he'd text, usually around 10 or 11 p.m. I tried to be understanding. I wanted to be the cool, trusting girlfriend, the one who didn't question his every move. But the knots in my stomach were getting tighter and tighter with every unexplained night out. Then one night, after a particularly long work event, he came home smelling like perfume. Not mine, not anything I recognized. I stared at him as he kicked off his shoes, and he caught my expression. "What?" he asked, laughing nervously. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Whose perfume is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He blinked, then quickly recovered. One of the women from the office hugged me. No big deal. He waved it off as if it was the most innocent thing in the world. But it didn't feel innocent, and I wasn't crazy for thinking so. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked his phone while he was in the shower. My hands were shaking as I typed in the old password, just to see if it still worked. It did, and that's when I saw everything. There were texts, hundreds of them, between him and another woman. Flirty messages, photos, inside jokes, things he hadn't shared with me in months. The most recent message from just a few hours ago read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My heart was racing, my vision blurred with tears. I sat there, holding his phone, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. He came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, towel slung over his shoulder, and froze when he saw me sitting there with his phone in my hand. "Explain," I whispered, holding up the screen. His face went pale. For a second, I thought he might try to deny it, but instead, he just sat down heavily on the bed, head in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he mumbled. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. 6 months, he admitted, barely above a whisper. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, telling me he loved me, while he was with someone else. I felt sick. I wanted to scream, cry, throw things, but I just couldn't. I sat there, numb, as he tried to explain himself. It didn't mean anything, he kept saying, as if that made it better. "Then why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but it didn't matter anymore. There was no coming back from this. The person I thought I knew, the person I trusted with my whole heart, was gone. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and left. He didn't try to stop me. There was nothing left to say. In the weeks that followed, I went through every possible emotion: rage, sadness, disbelief. I replayed every conversation. Every night he came home late, every work event, wondering how I could have been so blind. But the truth is, I knew. Deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to believe it. Looking back now, the signs were all there. The phone, the late nights, the emotional distance. I saw it happening right in front of me. But I convinced myself it was nothing. Because the alternative, the truth, was too painful to face. If I've learned anything, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let love blind you to the truth. Don't let someone make you feel crazy for noticing the cracks in a relationship. You deserve more than that. I don't know if I'll ever fully heal from what happened, but I do know one thing. Next time, I won't ignore the signs. Because love shouldn't make you question your worth. And if it does, it's not love. It's manipulation in disguise. This happened when I was 22 and working as a rideshare driver to make extra cash. I just moved to a new city, so I didn't really know my way around yet, but the app made it easy. Most nights were routine. Drunk people coming home from bars, couples headed to restaurants, airport pickups. It was easy money, and I didn't mind the late hours. That night started like any other. It was a Friday, so I knew I'd be busy. The app pinged me around 1:30 a.m. One last ride before I called it a night. I was parked downtown, close to where the bars let out, so I figured it was just another drunk looking to get home. The pickup location was in a weird spot, though, just outside the downtown area, on the edge of a quiet residential neighborhood. No streetlights, no houses close together, just dark roads winding through a cluster of old, run-down buildings. I hesitated for a second, but the payout looked good, so I accepted the ride. When I pulled up to the location, the first thing I noticed was how empty the street was. No bars, no convenience stores, nothing but a couple of boarded-up buildings and a flickering streetlight that barely cast enough light to see the curb. I slowed the car and double-checked the address on the app. This was the right place. I pulled up to the curb and waited. A few seconds passed, and I didn't see anyone. I thought, great, another drunk who can't find their way to the pickup point. I tapped the button on the app to send a "Here" notification and leaned back in my seat, drumming my fingers on the wheel. Then I saw him. A man stepped out from the shadows between two buildings, walking slowly toward my car. He was tall, wearing a hooded jacket that hung loose around his frame. His head was down, and I couldn't see his face, but something about the way he moved made my skin crawl. It was too smooth, too deliberate, like he'd been waiting for me. He stopped a few feet from the passenger side door and just stood there, as if deciding whether to get in or not. I rolled down the window a crack and called out, "Are you James?" The name listed on the app. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was confused by the question. Then, after a moment, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave. Something wasn't right. His movements were too slow, too calculated, like he was playing a part he didn't quite understand. But against my better judgment, I reached over and unlocked the passenger door. The door didn't open. Instead, the man just stood there, staring down at the handle like he was waiting for something. I felt my heart start to race, that deep down, primal kind of fear you can't explain. My fingers hovered over the lock button, ready to press it, when something caught my eye. Another figure. In the rearview mirror, I saw someone else stepping out from behind the car, a second man, moving just as slowly, approaching from the back. My throat tightened. I was boxed in. Without thinking, I slammed the lock button and threw the car into drive, tires screeching against the pavement as I shot forward. I didn't care if it made me look crazy or if I got a bad rating. Something told me if I didn't leave right that second, I wasn't getting out of there at all. In the rearview mirror, I saw both men just standing there, watching as I sped off into the night. Neither of them tried to follow me. They didn't yell or wave or act angry that I'd left them behind. They just stood there, motionless, like they'd expected me to drive away. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station several miles away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and just sat there trying to calm my breathing. I opened the rideshare app, ready to cancel the ride, but when I looked at the trip history, something sent a chill down my spine. The ride? It was gone. No record of a request, no pickup location, no James. It was as if the ride had never existed. My heart started racing again. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I'd seen the notification, accepted the ride, driven to the location. And yet, there was nothing. I sat there in the car, replaying the whole thing in my head, trying to make sense of it. Had it been some kind of glitch? Or worse, had someone hacked the app to lure drivers to that spot? To this day, I have no idea who those men were or what they wanted. But I know one thing for sure. If I hadn't listened to my gut and driven away, something bad would have happened. Maybe they were just looking to rob me. Or maybe it was something worse. I'll never know. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Alright, here's my story. My first day in the industry was a total train wreck, but somehow I made it through, and it ended up being one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I was 23, living paycheck to paycheck, juggling a crappy retail job and a mountain of student loan debt. I kept telling myself that things would get better, but every month it felt like I was sinking deeper. One night, I was scrolling through Instagram and saw a girl I knew from high school post about how she'd paid off her car by dancing. And there I was, debating whether I could afford both ramen and laundry detergent that week. I DM'd her, mostly out of curiosity, and asked if the money was really as good as people said. She replied, "The first night's scary, but after that, it's easy." And yeah, the money is worth it. That was enough for me. I figured, screw it. What's the worst that could happen? I called a club the next day and asked if they were hiring. The manager told me to come in that night. No experience needed. The words "no experience" gave me some relief, until I realized that meant I'd be figuring it out as I went. I didn't have any real stripper clothes, so I threw on a tight dress that I usually wore to house parties, along with the only heels I owned, cheap platform shoes that were not made for dancing. I took one last look in the mirror before leaving, whispered, "You got this," and headed out. When I got to the club, a place called the Diamond Lounge, I was already regretting my decision. The place looked a little run down, but not sketchy enough to make me bolt. The bouncer barely acknowledged me as I shuffled inside, heart pounding. The manager, a bald guy named Vince with a leather jacket and a Bluetooth earpiece, gave me a quick once-over. "First time?" he asked, grinning like he already knew the answer. "Yeah," I admitted, trying not to sound like I was about to pass out. He gave me a nod. "You'll be fine. Just get on stage, move to the music, and don't fall." Classic. Solid life advice. In the dressing room, I met a couple of other dancers. Most of them were too busy fixing their hair or touching up their makeup to care about the new girl. But one of them, a girl named Bianca, smiled at me through the mirror. "First night?" she asked. "How can you tell?" I said, fidgeting with my dress. "Bianca laughed. You've got that 'what the hell am I doing here' look." "Don't worry, it's normal." She handed me a bottle of body spray and said, "You'll be fine. Just smile, act like you're having fun, and don't take it too seriously." The first night's always the hardest. When it was time for my first set, I was shaking so badly I thought my knees would buckle. The DJ announced, "All right, give it up for a Ruby." Yes, I panicked and blurted out Ruby when Vince asked me for a stage name earlier. I stumbled out onto the stage, blinded by the lights, and grabbed the pole like it was a lifeline. The music started, some generic EDM beat, and I tried to do a little spin, and guess what? I missed the pole entirely and almost ate shit right in front of everyone. I caught myself just in time, but I could feel my face turning bright red. A couple of guys at the front chuckled, and one of them tossed a crumpled dollar onto the stage. Not the most encouraging start. I told myself to keep moving, even though every part of me wanted to run back to the dressing room and cry. I did a little hair flip, tried to sway my hips, and somehow made it through the rest of the song without falling flat on my face. A few more singles landed at my feet, and even though it wasn't much, it felt like a small victory. When the song ended, I scurried off the stage, heart pounding in my chest. Bianca was waiting for me backstage, grinning like she'd just watched the funniest movie of her life. "See? You didn't die," she said, handing me a water bottle. "Barely," I muttered, still trying to catch my breath. "The first one's always the worst," she said with a wink. "After this, it's smooth sailing." The rest of the night was interesting. My first lap dance was with this nervous guy who kept apologizing the whole time. "Sorry, I don't really know how this works," he mumbled. Honestly, I didn't know either, so we just awkwardly sat there while I swayed a little and tried not to laugh. He tipped me $20 at the end and said, "You're doing great," which was sweet, if not a little weird. But the second guy? Total nightmare. He smelled like beer and bad decisions and kept trying to grab my waist, even after I moved his hands away 3 times. I finally had to stand up and say, "Okay, we're done." He rolled his eyes and muttered something about how I wasn't worth the money, but I didn't care. Bianca gave me a high five when I told her what happened. "Good job," she said. "You set a boundary. Some girls don't learn that until it's too late." By the end of the night, I was exhausted. My feet were killing me, my thighs were sore, and I was covered in glitter that I knew would never fully wash off. But when I counted my tips, $1.50, I felt this strange, unexpected sense of accomplishment. It wasn't a lot, but it was more than I'd made in a week at my retail job. Walking out of the club that night, with cash stuffed in my bag and my cheap heels in hand, I felt proud. Not because I was great at dancing, I definitely wasn't, but because I had done something that scared the hell out of me and survived. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back. Each time it got a little easier. I learned how to move without looking like a deer in headlights, how to flirt without cringing, and how to spot the creeps before they even opened their mouths. I wasn't the best dancer, but I got better at reading the room and figuring out which customers were worth my time. After about 6 months, I decided it was time to move on. It wasn't something I wanted to do forever, but it got me through a rough patch, and I don't regret it for a second. It gave me more than just money. It gave me confidence, independence, and the ability to stand up for myself. So yeah, my first day was a disaster. But it was also the beginning of something that made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. And for that, I'm grateful. I'm not the kind of person who gets scared easily. I don't believe in ghosts or cryptids or any of those weird internet stories. But after what happened last month, I'm starting to wonder if there's something out there that we aren't supposed to understand. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and I was driving home from a friend's house. I'd taken this route dozens of times before, a long, winding road through the woods, with only a few scattered houses along the way. It's peaceful during the day, but at night, it can feel off. It's the kind of road where you keep glancing in your rearview mirror, just to make sure nothing's behind you. That night, the fog was heavy. It clung to the trees and hovered just above the asphalt, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of the car. I had the radio on low, hoping the sound would keep me awake until I got home. The road was empty. No headlights, no taillights, just me and the fog. About halfway through the drive, I saw something strange up ahead. It looked like a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or someone broken down and looking for help. I slowed the car, squinting to get a better look. That's when I realized it wasn't a person. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that were too long and joints that bent the wrong way. It stood perfectly still, just watching as my car rolled closer. Its face, or what I thought was a face, was pale, almost white, with deep-set eyes that looked hollow. I felt a jolt of panic and hit the brakes, but the car kept moving, like it was being pulled forward. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me through the windshield, as if it had been waiting for me. The headlights cast its shadow across the road, and that's when I noticed it wasn't alone. There were more of them, tall, thin figures, just like the first one. They stood at the edge of the road, barely visible through the fog, their hollow eyes fixed on my car. There must have been 6 or 7 of them, all watching, all completely still. I tried to back up, but the gear shift wouldn't move. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grip the steering wheel. The radio started to crackle. Just static at first, then something else. It was like a voice, whispering just beneath the static, but I couldn't make out the words. The more I listened, the more it sounded like my name. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in the driver's seat. It felt like time had stopped. I kept telling myself to move, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. All I could do was sit there, staring at those figures, and hope they wouldn't come any closer. Then, without warning, they vanished. 1 second they were there, and the next the road was empty. The fog seemed to lift. and the radio cut out, leaving me in complete silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I slammed the car into reverse and backed up until I reached a turnoff I recognized. I didn't care how long the detour would take. I just needed to get away from that stretch of road. The whole drive home, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see one of those things standing in the middle of the road again. But I never did. When I finally got home, I sat in the driveway for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the fog, or maybe I was overtired and imagining things. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I saw them, and they saw me. I haven't driven that road since. I take the long way home now, even though it adds an extra 30 minutes to my commute. I don't care. Whatever those things were, I don't want to see them again. And sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still see them, standing perfectly still, just watching. I've been faking a friendship with someone I can't stand for over a decade. It sounds insane when I say it out loud, like, why wouldn't I just walk away, cut ties, and move on? But the truth is, somewhere along the way, I got stuck. And now, every time we hang out, I feel like I'm wearing this tight, suffocating mask, pretending to care about someone who exhausts me. And I can't stop. Her name is Claire. We met in college, and back then we clicked instantly. She was fun, wild, and fearless. The kind of person who would convince you to ditch a class, take tequila shots at 2 p.m., and dance barefoot at a house party. I was more reserved, and Claire brought out this reckless side of me that I didn't know existed. It felt like freedom, but somewhere along the way, that wild charm started to feel more like chaos. It started small. She'd flake on plans, show up late, or cancel at the last second without apologizing. At first, I let it slide. Claire was Claire after all, but then it became a pattern. If I needed her, she wasn't there. If I told her something important, she'd forget. She was the kind of person who sucked up all the oxygen in a room, turning every conversation into a story about herself. I told myself she'd grow out of it, that once we were out of the party phase, things would get better. But they didn't. If anything, they got worse. She became this emotional wreck, constantly complaining about her life, her job, her relationships, but never doing anything to change. Every conversation was about her problems, and anytime I tried to open up about my own struggles, she'd steer the conversation right back to herself. It was like talking to a mirror that only reflected her. By then, I knew the friendship was toxic. I knew she drained me, but I also felt responsible for her, like I owed it to her to stay. She didn't have a lot of other close friends, and she'd always say things like, "You're the only person I can talk to," or "I don't know what I'd do without you." It felt like a trap. Every time I tried to pull away, she'd pull me right back in with some new crisis, another breakup, a work meltdown, a falling out with a roommate. I felt guilty even thinking about leaving her. So I stayed, and now here I am, 10 years later, still stuck in this fake friendship. We talk almost every day. She sends me memes, long voice notes about her latest drama, and random texts at all hours. I respond like a good friend, asking questions, giving advice, pretending to care. And the worst part is I'm good at it. I've gotten so used to faking this friendship that it feels second nature. She has no idea how I really feel. Everyone in my life thinks we're inseparable. My boyfriend calls her my other half because of how often we talk. My family always asks about her, and when I say we're still close, they smile like it's a good thing. No one knows that every time her name pops up on my phone, I feel this pit of dread in my stomach. It's not that I hate her. Not exactly. I think part of me still cares about her, or at least a version of her I met in college. But the friendship has become so one-sided, so exhausting, that it feels like I'm carrying her emotional baggage along with my own. And the thing is, she doesn't even know she's doing it. She thinks everything between us is fine. She thinks I'm happy being her go-to person for everything. But I'm not. I've thought about cutting her off more times than I can count. Just ghosting her. But the guilt always pulls me back. I imagine her realizing I've disappeared, scrolling through our old messages, wondering what she did wrong. And I know she'd crumble. She's fragile in a way that makes it impossible to leave without feeling like the villain. I tried to set boundaries once, told her I needed space, that I was overwhelmed with my own stuff. She apologized, cried, and promised she'd be better. And she was, for about a week. Then it all went back to the way it was, and I didn't have the energy to fight it anymore. Now, it feels like I'm living a double life. To everyone else, I'm Claire's best friend. But in my head, I'm counting down the minutes every time we talk, praying she doesn't need something from me that I can't give. I wish I could be honest with her, tell her how I really feel, how this friendship drains me, how I'm only still here because I don't know how to leave. But every time I imagine that conversation, it feels impossible. How do you tell someone who loves you that you've been faking it for years? That every time you see their name on your phone, you feel nothing but exhaustion? So I stay. I keep pretending. I send the heart emojis, laugh at her jokes, listen to the same complaints over and over. And every time I do, I feel like I'm burying a little piece of myself. I know this can't go on forever. One day, something will snap. I'll say the wrong thing, or she'll notice the cracks in my fake enthusiasm, and everything will come crashing down. And maybe that's what I need, a big, messy ending. Maybe then I'll finally be free. But for now, I'm stuck. And the saddest part? I think she is too. This one happened during the final week of our senior year. And I swear, it started as a joke and ended with a parade of chaos no one was prepared for. It's now simply known as the time we organized the senior zoo. So, here's the thing. Every year, the seniors at my school would try to pull off some kind of outrageous prank. Some years were a hit, like the time they filled every locker with balloons. Other years, the pranks totally flopped, like when someone tried to fill the hallways with alarm clocks set to go off at the same time, but the janitors just collected them all before school even started. Our class? We wanted to go down in history. The idea came from Ethan, who was one of those guys who had a wild imagination and absolutely no sense of limits. One day during lunch, Ethan said, "What if we turned the school into a zoo?" At first, we all laughed it off. "Yeah, okay, Ethan, sure," we said. But Ethan wasn't joking. His eyes lit up, and you could practically see the wheels turning in his brain. "No, I'm serious. Everyone picks an animal, dresses up as it, and stays in character for the entire day. We can take over the hallways." Somehow, we went from laughing at the idea to being all in within about 5 minutes. The plan was absurd, and that's exactly why we had to do it. Here's how it worked. Every senior had to pick an animal and fully commit. I'm talking costumes, props, and acting like that animal throughout the whole school day. We would assign certain hallways to be exhibits and stations like the gym and cafeteria as feeding zones. Ethan even made a sign-up sheet so there wouldn't be too many of one animal. No one wanted 10 lions and no penguins, you know? The key to the whole thing was coordination. It had to feel massive, like the entire senior class had lost their minds all at once. No half-assing it. We were either going full zoo or not at all. The morning of the prank was pure chaos right from the start. I'll never forget walking into the front entrance of the school that morning and immediately seeing 2 guys dressed as giraffes, complete with cardboard neck extensions, clumsily trying to get through the double doors. Behind them was a girl in a full penguin suit, waddling down the hallway with her backpack dragging behind her. And then, of course, there was Ethan, who showed up in the most ridiculous costume of all, a silverback gorilla. When I say Ethan committed to the role, I mean it. He thumped his chest, grunted at passing teachers, and spent the entire day walking on his knuckles. He even threw a banana at the assistant principal and yelled, "I am the alpha." The teachers? They didn't know what the hell was going on. It wasn't just a few seniors pulling this off. It was everyone. Everywhere you turned, there was another animal. One guy dressed as a parrot and squawked every time someone asked him a question. The lunch lady almost cried when a group of kids in cow costumes walked up to the counter mooing and demanding to know if the burgers were one of their own. Then, things got even crazier. Around third period, someone brought in an actual goat. Yeah, a real, live goat. Don't ask me how they managed it, but apparently one of the seniors lived on a farm, and they thought it would be hilarious to sneak it into school. They tied a makeshift leash around its neck and just walked it around the hallways like it was a petting zoo. At one point, the goat ended up in the math wing, where it decided to relieve itself all over the floor. The janitor came by with a mop, took one look at the goat, and just shook his head like, "I don't get paid enough for this." But the highlight of the day, the moment that solidified the senior zoo as an absolute legend, happened during lunch. The cafeteria was already a madhouse by that point. Ethan, still in guerrilla mode, had taken over one of the lunch tables and declared it his territory, daring anyone to sit near him. Meanwhile, the guy in the parrot costume was sitting on top of the vending machine, refusing to come down unless someone fed him chips. And then, right in the middle of it all, the goat got loose. It sprinted through the cafeteria, knocking over chairs and tables, with a couple of seniors chasing after it, shouting, "Grab it! Someone grab the goat!" Kids were laughing so hard they were crying, and even the teachers couldn't keep a straight face. One of the cheerleaders tried to block the goat's path, but it juked her like a football player and bolted toward the exit doors. The entire cafeteria erupted in applause. People were screaming with laughter. It was beautiful. Now, here's the crazy part. The school administration didn't even try to stop us. I think they knew they were outnumbered. There were just too many of us in too many ridiculous costumes. And it wasn't like we were breaking anything or causing serious trouble aside from the goat poop situation. By the time the final bell rang, the entire school felt like a circus. Kids were taking selfies with the animals. The principal was walking around rubbing his temples like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this point. And Ethan? Ethan climbed onto the roof of the gym and pounded his chest one last time, declaring himself king of the zoo. Somehow, no one got suspended. I think the administration was just relieved that the goat didn't escape into the neighborhood. The prank was an absolute masterpiece. No one saw it coming, and it was pulled off flawlessly. Even years later, people still talk about the senior zoo like it was the greatest thing that ever happened at our school. And honestly, they're not wrong. So, this is the story of how I almost died because of pants. Yep, pants. Something I've been putting on my entire life without a second thought nearly took me out. I still can't fully explain how it all went so wrong, but here we are. It started on an ordinary Monday morning. I'd slept through my alarm, again, so I was already running late for work. You know that kind of frantic rush where everything you do feels like a mini emergency? Coffee brewing too slow? Rage. Toothpaste tube empty? Crisis mode. Well, that was my morning. Every second counted, and I was moving like my life depended on it. I managed to shower, throw on a wrinkled shirt, and was halfway to getting dressed when I grabbed a pair of jeans off the floor. Now, these weren't just any jeans. These were the I can't be bothered to wash them, but they're not that dirty jeans, stiff, tight, and already a bit of a struggle to get on even under ideal conditions. But I didn't have time to think. I just grabbed them and started pulling them on, hopping around the room on one foot like an idiot. And then it happened. As I tried to shove my left leg into the pants, my foot got stuck, like really stuck in the fabric. Instead of stopping, I panicked and forced it, thinking, if I just push hard enough, they'll slide right on. Big mistake. My foot twisted awkwardly, and the next thing I knew, I was airborne. I must have kicked off the floor weird because I went down fast. I mean, 1 second I was vertical, and the next I was horizontal, midair in slow motion, thinking, this is it. I'm actually about to die because of a pair of pants. I hit the ground hard. My back slammed into the floor with a loud thud, and the side of my head bounced off the edge of my dresser with a crack that sent stars shooting across my vision. For a few terrifying seconds, I couldn't breathe. You know that feeling when the wind gets knocked out of you? Yeah, that times 10. I just lay there, gasping like a fish, trying to suck air into my lungs while my brain scrambled to figure out if I was in fact still alive. But wait, it gets worse. As I lay there, dazed, tangled in my jeans like a captured animal, my ceiling fan, because, of course, was on full blast right above me. And wouldn't you know it? One of the blades wobbled. I watched in horror as the fan made this ominous creaking noise, and for a moment, I was absolutely convinced the entire thing was about to come crashing down on me. Death by pants and ceiling fan. What a legacy that would have been. Fortunately, the fan stayed put, but I wasn't out of the woods yet. My foot was still twisted awkwardly in the pants, and when I tried to move, I felt this sharp pain shoot through my ankle. Great. Now I was thinking, did I just sprain my ankle? Or is it worse? And here's the kicker. I live alone. No roommates, no pets, just me. If I couldn't get up, I'd be lying there, trapped in a pair of evil jeans, waiting for someone to notice I hadn't shown up to work. Can you imagine that conversation? Yeah, we sent someone to check on him, found him unconscious on the floor, pants half on, fan still running. R.I.P., buddy. So, I did the only thing I could. I took a deep breath. Well, as deep as I could manage, and try to untangle myself. It took some serious maneuvering because every time I twisted the wrong way, my ankle screamed in protest. But after a few minutes of sheer determination and swearing at the top of my lungs, I managed to free my foot from the death grip of denim. I sat there on the floor for a while, catching my breath and trying not to cry from a mix of frustration and relief. My head was throbbing, my ankle was throbbing, and I was covered in sweat, not from any kind of workout, mind you, but from putting on pants. Eventually, I got up, very slowly, and limped over to the mirror to assess the damage. I had a goose egg forming on the side of my head where I hit the dresser, and my ankle was definitely swollen. But, miraculously, nothing seemed broken. I grabbed an ice pack from the freezer and sat down on the couch, trying to process how close I'd come to disaster. And you know what? I still had to go to work, so I hobbled into my car, ankle wrapped in a makeshift ice bandage, and somehow made it through the day without anyone noticing that I'd almost died putting on clothes. Well, almost no one. One coworker asked why I was limping, and I just said, I tripped this morning. I wasn't about to tell them the full story. Some things are too stupid to admit out loud. So here's the lesson. Take your time with pants. I don't care if you're late for work or late for your wedding. Pants will betray you if you rush. And always sit down when you put on tight jeans. Trust me, it's not worth the risk. To this day, every time I pull on a pair of pants, I get a little nervous. I move slowly, deliberately, like I'm defusing a bomb. Because once you've been nearly killed by your own wardrobe, you never really trust it again. This happened a few months ago, and honestly, I still don't know how to explain it. The more I think about it, the more unreal it feels, like something out of a dream I can't quite wake up from. But I know it was real. It had to be, and I haven't felt the same since. It was a Friday night, and I was driving home after visiting my parents for the weekend. It was a long drive, about 3 hours through winding back roads, and by the time I left their place, it was well past midnight. Normally, I'd crash at their house and drive home in the morning, but I had plans the next day, so I figured I'd just suck it up and drive through the night. The first hour or so was uneventful, just me, the hum of the engine, and a podcast playing quietly in the background. The road was dark, with no streetlights for miles, just patches of forest pressing in from both sides. I remember thinking how quiet everything was, no other cars, no animals, not even the wind through the trees. Just a blanket of stillness, the kind that makes you feel like the only person left in the world. Then I saw it. At first, it looked like a deer standing at the edge of the road, half hidden in the shadows. I slowed the car, squinting to get a better look. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was something else. The figure was tall, almost impossibly tall, its limbs thin and angular like sticks bent in all the wrong places. It was hunched over slightly, its long arms dangling at its sides, and its head was tilted, as if it were curious about me. The headlights caught the glint of its eyes, too pale, glowing orbs that locked onto me the moment I saw it. I felt an icy wave of fear wash over me, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was some strange animal I'd never seen before. I kept driving, heart pounding, trying to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. But as I rounded the next bend, I saw it again. It was standing at the edge of the road, exactly like before, tall, thin, and hunched with those pale eyes locked onto me. There was no way it could have gotten ahead of me. I'd been driving the whole time, but there it was waiting. I slammed on the gas, the tires skidding slightly on the asphalt as I sped past it. My hands were shaking, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. But no matter how fast I drove, the fear stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. And then the radio cut out. 1 second, my podcast was playing normally. The next, the speakers erupted in a wave of static. I reached for the dial, fumbling to turn it off, but before I could, a voice broke through the static. "Where are you going?" it whispered, soft and deliberate. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from the radio. It was inside the car. I glanced at the rearview mirror, heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. The thing from the road was sitting in the back seat. It was hunched over, its long limbs folded awkwardly to fit inside the car. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine through the mirror, and it smiled, this awful, twisted grin that stretched too wide across its gaunt face. I swerved, nearly running off the road, but when I looked back, the seat was empty. I drove like a madman after that, flooring it down the empty road, desperate to get away from whatever the hell that thing was. I didn't stop, didn't look back, not until I finally saw the distant glow of the highway lights. I pulled off at the first gas station I found, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. My hands were still shaking, and my heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I told myself it was just a trick of the mind. Maybe I was overtired, or maybe I dozed off for a moment and dreamed the whole thing. But when I reached for my phone, hoping to distract myself, I found a new notification waiting for me. It was a text from an unknown number. "See you soon." I stared at the screen, feeling like the ground had just dropped out from under me. My hands went numb, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to throw the phone out the window, leave it behind, anything to make it stop. But then I noticed something else. There was another message hidden just below the first one. It wasn't a text. It was a photo. With shaking hands, I opened it. The picture was of me, sitting in the driver's seat of my car, white-knuckled, staring at the road. The photo had been taken from inside the car, from the back seat. I haven't driven at night since, and every time I get into my car, I check the back seat, just to be sure. I still think about that night more than I care to admit. I don't know if I was just stupid, lonely, or both, but either way, I knew what I was doing was wrong. And I did it anyway. This happened last fall. I was 25 and in a rough spot, fresh out of a relationship, stuck in a job I hated, and just feeling lost in life. My best friend, Drew, had always been the guy I could lean on. We'd been close since middle school. If I wasn't at my place, I was at his. His house was like my second home, and his mom, Natalie, was a constant presence in my life. Natalie had always been noticeable. She wasn't one of those moms who blended into the background. She was beautiful in this way that felt effortless, athletic, stylish, and always put together. But she wasn't flashy. She carried herself with this quiet confidence that made her seem younger than she was. Growing up, my friends would make jokes. "Dude, your mom's hot" kind of stuff, but we never took it seriously. She was Drew's mom. Off limits. That was the rule. You don't even think about her that way. Until one day I did. It started on a Sunday night, completely by accident. Drew was supposed to meet me at his mom's house for dinner. Something we did every now and then, but he texted last minute saying he was stuck at work. Natalie told me I could still stay if I wanted. And since I didn't have anything better to do, I figured why not. She made us dinner. Just the two of us. At first, everything felt normal. We talked about life, work, the usual stuff. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. I don't know how to explain it, but the conversation got personal. She asked me how I was really doing after my breakup. I tried to play it off, saying I was fine, but she kept pressing. And eventually, I let my guard down. I told her how I'd been feeling, how lost I was, how nothing in my life seemed to be working out. She listened in a way that felt different, more than just polite. "You're a good guy," she said, placing her hand on mine. "You just need to give yourself a little time." Her hand lingered, just for a moment, but it was enough to send my brain into overdrive. There was a part of me, probably the smart part, that knew this was dangerous, that I needed to leave before things got complicated. But I stayed, and then she kissed me. It was soft, tentative, like she wasn't sure if I'd kiss her back. But I did, and once I did, it was like everything I knew about right and wrong went out the window. One kiss turned into two, and before I knew it, we were on the couch, tangled up in each other. My mind was screaming at me to stop, but my body wasn't listening. We ended up in her bedroom. It was fast and messy, the kind of thing you regret even while it's happening. But in that moment, none of it mattered. It just felt inevitable. The next morning, I woke up in her bed, and the reality of what I'd done hit me like a ton of bricks. I just slept with my best friend's mom. What the hell was I thinking? Natalie didn't seem fazed. She smiled at me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You don't need to overthink it," she said. "It was just nice. I didn't say much. I just got dressed, muttered something about needing to head out, and left. I spent the rest of the week convincing myself that it was a one-time thing. A stupid mistake. Something I'd never let happen again. But then Natalie texted me a few days later. Something casual like, "Hope you're doing okay, smiley face." I should have ignored it. I knew I should have ignored it. But I didn't. One text turned into a conversation. And a few days after that, I found myself back at her house. It became a routine, sneaking around, meeting whenever Drew wasn't home. At first, I told myself it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. But the more time we spent together, the deeper I got pulled in. We weren't just hooking up. We were talking, laughing, hanging out like we were in some kind of secret relationship. And it felt good, dangerous, exciting, but good. Every time I left her house, though, the guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd betrayed Drew in the worst way possible, and he had no idea. The worst part? I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And of course it did. One night, I was at Natalie's house when Drew came home early. He wasn't supposed to be back until the next morning, but there he was, standing in the doorway, staring at me with this look of complete shock on his face. "What the fuck?" he said, his voice low and trembling. I froze. I didn't know what to say. There was no excuse, no explanation that could make it okay. Drew looked at me, then at his mom, and I could see the betrayal written all over his face. "You were hooking up with my mom?" he whispered, like he couldn't even believe the words coming out of his mouth. I tried to apologize, but what was I going to say? There was no fixing this. "Get out," Drew said, his voice sharp and final. "We're done. Don't ever talk to me again." I left without another word. That was the last time I saw Drew. He blocked me on everything, text, social media, the whole deal. I tried reaching out a few times, but it was pointless. I'd crossed a line you can't come back from. As for Natalie, we never talked again either. The whole thing just ended. And honestly, that was for the best. It's been almost a year now, and not a day goes by that I don't think about it. I lost one of the best friendships I ever had because I couldn't control myself. And for what? A few stolen moments that weren't worth the damage they caused. So yeah, that's my story. I wish I could say I've learned something, but I don't even know what the lesson is. Some mistakes you can't undo. Some bridges, once burned, are gone for good. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's this: some lines just aren't worth crossing. And once you do, there's no going back. This happened last fall, right before Halloween. I work as a maintenance tech, and part of my job involves responding to late-night emergency calls for repairs. I usually don't mind it. Most of the time, it's just something small like a water heater going out or someone locking themselves out of a storage unit. But that night was different. I got a call from an apartment complex on the edge of town. The woman on the phone sounded frustrated, saying the power had gone out in one of the vacant units. She was worried it was going to affect the neighboring apartments, so she asked if I could come take a look. It was almost 11 p.m., and I was tempted to say no, but I figured it'd be a quick job. Just reset a breaker and head home. When I pulled into the complex, the place was eerily quiet. No lights in the parking lot, no sounds from the nearby apartments, just a dim, flickering streetlight at the far end of the lot. The whole place had a weird vibe, like it had been abandoned, even though I knew people lived there. I grabbed my toolkit and headed toward the building. The vacant unit was on the 3rd floor, according to the woman who called, so I climbed the stairs, the soles of my boots echoing in the silence. As I reached the top floor, I realized something odd. All the other apartment doors had decorations on them. Halloween wreaths, plastic pumpkins, things like that. Except for the door to the vacant unit. It was completely bare, not even a number on it, like it had been forgotten or scrubbed out of existence. I checked my work order again to make sure I had the right address. Unit 305. This was it. I knocked once, just out of habit, even though I knew no one was supposed to be inside. No answer. So I pulled out the master key, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. The apartment was freezing. I mean, it was colder inside than it was out in the October night air. I could see my breath the second I stepped inside. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Of course. That's why I was there, right? I pulled out my flashlight and scanned the room. The place was completely empty. No furniture, no trash, no signs that anyone had been in there for a long time. Just bare walls, scuffed floors, and the faint smell of damp wood. The breaker box was supposed to be in a closet near the kitchen, so I headed that way, my boots crunching on bits of dirt that had been tracked across the floor. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It didn't make sense. The place was empty. I knew it was empty, but something about the air felt wrong. Like the apartment was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice something. I found the breaker box and opened it. All the switches were in the right position. Nothing tripped. I frowned, trying to figure out what could have caused the power outage. That's when I heard it, a soft shuffle, coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Slowly, I turned around and scanned the room with my flashlight. Nothing, just the empty apartment. But I knew I'd heard something. It was the sound of someone shifting their weight, like they'd been standing perfectly still and just moved a fraction of an inch. I swallowed hard and tried to shake off the nerves. Maybe the sound had come from the floorboards shifting under my weight. I turned back to the breaker box, about to shut it and call it a night, when I heard it again. This time it was closer. The sound of bare feet sliding across the floor, just behind me. Every hair on my body stood on end. I whipped around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. And that's when I saw it. There, standing in the far corner of the room, was a figure. It was human-shaped, but wrong. It was too tall, its limbs slightly too long, and its skin looked pale and waxy, like a mannequin left out in the cold for too long. It stood perfectly still, head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if trying to understand what I was. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The thing didn't move. It just stared at me, its empty eyes reflecting the faint beam of my flashlight. Then slowly it smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. The corners of its mouth stretched too far, curling upward in a way that no human face should be able to manage. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Without thinking, I dropped my toolkit and bolted for the door, my boots slamming against the floor as I ran. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of feet following me, calm, deliberate, as if it knew it didn't need to hurry. I reached the door, yanked it open, and threw myself into the hallway. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I sprinted down the stairs, taking them two at a time, not daring to look back until I reached the parking lot. When I finally reached my truck, I jumped in, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot, my heart still pounding in my chest. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing standing at the edge of the lot, watching me leave. But there was nothing, just the empty street and the dark silhouette of the building behind me. The next morning, I called the apartment manager to report what had happened. I was half expecting her to tell me I was crazy, that the unit was empty and nothing strange had ever happened there. But instead, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "You were in 305? Yeah, I replied. Why? Another pause. Then, quietly, she said, that unit's been vacant for years. The last tenant, well, let's just say something happened in there. You're not the first person to say they've seen something. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I trusted my gut, and it had gotten me out of there just in time. I never went back to that complex. Some things, once you experience them, leave a mark. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is listen to that little voice in your head telling you to run. Because whatever was in that apartment that night, it didn't want me to leave. I've been lying about quitting smoking for almost 2 years now. Everyone thinks I stopped cold turkey, but the truth is I never really quit. I just got better at hiding it. It all started when my partner gave me an ultimatum. We've been dating for about a year, and they told me they couldn't see a future with someone who smoked. I understood where they were coming from. They hated the smell, worried about my health, and didn't want to build a life with someone who couldn't kick the habit. So I promised to quit. I'm in it at the time. I really did. I thought, okay, this is the push I need. I'll quit, get healthy, and prove to everyone, including myself, that I can do it. The first week was hell. I was irritable, sweaty, and constantly on edge. I tried everything: nicotine gum, patches, even those weird herbal cigarettes that taste like burnt tea leaves. But nothing helped. Every minute without a cigarette felt like an hour, and every little annoyance sent me spiraling. I snapped at people for no reason, lost my temper over stupid things, and felt like I was crawling out of my own skin. After about 10 days, I cracked. I snuck out to a gas station, bought a pack, and told myself it would just be one, just enough to take the edge off. I sat in my car, windows rolled down, and lit up, feeling this overwhelming wave of relief wash over me. It was like I could finally breathe again. That's when I made the first real lie. When I went home that night, my partner asked me how I was doing, if the cravings were still bad. I smiled, kissed him on the cheek, and said, "It's getting easier." From there, the lie grew. I tell everyone I was proud of being smoke-free, that quitting was tough but worth it. My partner was thrilled. They even threw me a little celebration after my first smoke-free month. I stood there, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by people telling me how proud they were, and I felt like a complete fraud. But I smiled through it, told them I felt amazing, and pretended I wasn't counting the minutes until I could sneak out for another cigarette. At first, it was just 1 or 2 a week. I'd hide them in my car or smoke when I knew no one would be around. But the longer I kept up the act, the worse it got. I started smoking every day, sneaking off during lunch breaks or late at night when my partner was asleep. I kept air freshener and gum in my bag at all times, obsessively checking my clothes for any trace of smoke. I got so good at covering my tracks that even I started to believe the lie. But it wasn't just the cigarettes I was hiding. It was the guilt. Every time my partner looked at me with pride, I felt like I was sinking. They'd talk about how strong I was for quitting, how happy they were that I was taking care of myself. And every time, I'd nod along, feeling that knot of shame tighten in my chest. It wasn't just about the smoking anymore. It was about the fact that I was building our entire relationship on a lie. And the worst part? I don't even know why I kept smoking. It's not like I enjoy it that much anymore. Half the time, I light up out of habit, not even thinking about it. But the idea of actually quitting feels impossible now. Like I've told this lie for so long that there's no way out without everything crumbling. I've thought about coming clean so many times. I imagine sitting my partner down and saying, "I never really quit. I tried, but I couldn't do it." But then I think about the look on their face, how hurt they'd be, how betrayed they'd feel, and I choke on the words before they can leave my mouth. They think I've come so far, and the idea of disappointing them is more terrifying than the thought of quitting for real. So I keep lying. I've built this routine now, sneaking cigarettes like a spy on some covert mission. I smoke in parking lots, back alleys, anywhere I could be alone for a few minutes. I've even driven out to random gas stations in the middle of the night just to smoke without the fear of getting caught. It's ridiculous, and I know it. The guilt is eating me alive, though. Every time I hold a cigarette, I feel like I'm holding a ticking time bomb. One wrong move, one slip up, and the whole charade will come crashing down. Sometimes I think it would almost be a relief to get caught, to have it all blow up so I wouldn't have to keep lying. But then I imagine the fallout, my partner's disappointment, my friends realizing I've been lying to them, too, and I can't bring myself to do it. So I keep smoking, and I keep pretending. The other day, my partner mentioned how proud they were of me for quitting. They said something like, "You're so much stronger than I thought." And I just smiled and said, "Thanks." But inside, I felt like I was falling apart. I wanted to tell them the truth right then and there, but the words got stuck in my throat like tar clinging to my lungs. I don't know how this ends. Maybe I'll get caught eventually. Maybe I'll manage to quit for real and carry this secret to my grave. Or maybe I'll just keep lying, pretending to be someone I'm not, until the weight of it all crushes me. All I know is I'm tired of sneaking around, tired of lying, tired of carrying this secret everywhere I go. But the idea of telling the truth scares me more than anything. So, for now, I keep smoking, and I keep pretending, and every time I light up, I wonder if this is the last one, if this is the cigarette that finally forces me to come clean. But it never is. This one happened during my junior year, and it still gets brought up every time we talk about high school pranks gone horribly, hilariously wrong. It's known simply as the fireworks in the gym incident. So, it all started with Tyler. If there's one thing you need to know about Tyler, it's that his brain ran on a strange combination of Mountain Dew, bad ideas, and YouTube videos of people doing stunts. Tyler lived for chaos. If he wasn't setting off bottle rockets in his backyard or riding a shopping cart down a hill, he was scheming his next big move. And this time, his big move was to sneak fireworks into the school pep rally. "Just a few little ones, man," he said casually during lunch one day, as if he was talking about borrowing a pencil. "Nothing huge. Just enough to, spice things up." At this point, I should have known better. I should have told Tyler to back down. But no, because I was 17 and stupid, I laughed and said, "You won't do it. Never. Say that, too." Tyler. His eyes lit up with that wild, mischievous glint that always meant trouble. And from that moment on, there was no stopping him. Tyler was going to light fireworks at the pep rally, and we were all going to see how it ended. The day of the pep rally arrived, and the gym was packed. The bleachers were overflowing with students. Teachers were scattered along the sidelines trying to look enthusiastic, and the cheerleaders were warming up for their routine. It was supposed to be one of those boring, school spirit events where everyone fakes excitement and pretends to care about the basketball team's upcoming game. But not for Tyler. For Tyler, this was his moment. He showed up wearing a hoodie with the front pocket stuffed with fireworks. I'm not talking about sparklers or smoke bombs either. I'm talking actual, honest-to-God fireworks. He had cherry bombs, Roman candles, and something called a screamer that he bought from a sketchy guy at a fireworks stand on the edge of town. "Are you really going to do this?" I whispered to him as we sat in the back row of the bleachers. Tyler just grinned and said, "You bet your ass I am." The first half of the rally went exactly as expected. Boring speeches from the principal. The cheerleaders did their routine, and the pep band played the same 3 songs they always played. It was dragging on, and people were starting to lose interest. And that's when Tyler made his move. Without a word, Tyler reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out the Roman candle. I saw him light it with one of those tiny gas station lighters, and before I could even process what was happening, he aimed it toward the center of the gym. Fwum! A bright green fireball shot out of the Roman candle, soaring through the air like a comet, right over the heads of the cheerleaders. For a second, the entire gym went silent. Everyone just stared, trying to figure out what they had just witnessed. Then the second fireball shot out. Fwum! That's when the screaming started. People started ducking and covering, diving under the bleachers like they were in a war zone. The cheerleaders scattered in every direction, and one of them actually did a backflip by accident trying to dodge the fireball. Tyler, meanwhile, was sitting there, grinning like a madman, holding the Roman candle like it was a magic wand. At this point, the teachers lost their minds. Mr. Callahan, the gym teacher, started yelling, "Who the hell is doing this?" while the assistant principal frantically blew his whistle like it was going to stop the fireworks. Spoiler, it did not. Before anyone could stop him, Tyler stood up, pulled a cherry bomb out of his pocket, and rolled it across the gym floor like a bowling ball. It spun wildly, sparks flying in every direction, until it exploded with a deafening bang right in front of the pep band. The drummer dropped his sticks, the tuba player let out a scream, and the trumpet section just kind of stared in horror. And then came the screamer. Tyler lit it, tossed it into the middle of the gym, and that thing let out the loudest, shrillest noise you've ever heard. It was so loud that the sound bounced off the walls, echoing like 1,000 angry banshees trapped in the building. Half the students started laughing hysterically, the other half looked like they were about to cry, and the poor principal stood frozen in place, mouth open like a fish gasping for air. And Tyler? Tyler just stood there, basking in the chaos he had created. He looked like he had never been prouder of himself. The fire alarm went off, of course. The sprinklers didn't activate, but the alarm was loud enough to add an extra layer of panic to the already insane scene. Kids were running for the exits. Teachers were shouting at everyone to stay calm, as if that was going to happen. And the pep band had given up entirely. One of the trumpet players just threw his instrument on the floor and walked out. Meanwhile, Tyler stood there like a king, arms spread wide, soaking it all in. But as always, all good chaos must come to an end. Just as Tyler was about to light one final firework, a second Roman candle, the school resource officer came charging toward him like a linebacker. The guy tackled Tyler so hard they both skidded across the gym floor. "What the hell is wrong with you?" the officer shouted as he wrestled the Roman candle out of Tyler's hand. Tyler, pinned to the ground, just grinned and said, "School spirit, baby." The fallout was intense. The school went into immediate lockdown. Everyone was sent home early, and the administration launched a full investigation to figure out how fireworks had made it into the gym in the first place. Parents were furious. The local news even ran a segment called "Teens Fireworks Stunt Sparks School Panic." My mom almost fainted when she saw Tyler's mugshot on TV. Tyler? Well, he got suspended for 2 weeks and banned from attending prom, but somehow, miraculously, he didn't get expelled. I think the principal just wanted him gone and figured expelling him would only prolong the chaos. But here's the kicker. Tyler became a legend. For the rest of the year, people called him Firework Tyler or just Roman Candle. Someone even made t-shirts with his face on them and the words, "School Spirit, baby." And at prom, despite being banned, Tyler still showed up in the parking lot, blasting music from his car and lighting sparklers in protest. Security didn't even try to stop him. They just let him do it. And honestly, that was the most fitting ending possible. So yeah, that's the story of how my buddy Tyler turned a boring pep rally into an explosive disaster, got tackled by a security officer, and somehow became the most legendary senior in our school's history. And if you're wondering if Tyler regrets it, not even a little. I saw him at our 5-year reunion, and the first thing he said to me was, "Remember the fireworks? Best day of my life." This one still haunts me. I try not to think about it, but late at night, it creeps back in, making my chest tighten with regret. I knew exactly what I was doing the whole time, and I did it anyway. And now, there's no fixing it. It happened about a year and a half ago. I was 24, working a dead-end job, and feeling like my life was going nowhere. My best friend, Sam, had always been the person I could turn to when things got tough. We'd known each other since high school, and his house had always been my escape when things at home got too stressful. His family had taken me in like one of their own, especially his mom, Lisa. Lisa wasn't just some regular suburban mom. She was sharp, funny, and always had this way of making everyone feel comfortable around her. She was divorced, and I knew she had been through a lot over the years, but she never seemed to let it wear her down. She was beautiful in that effortless way, like she didn't need to try, and she still looked incredible. Even in high school, guys would joke about her being a hot mom. But to me, she was always just Sam's mom. That is, until I ruined everything. It was a Friday night, and Sam invited me over for drinks at his place. His girlfriend was out of town, so it was just the two of us hanging out. We played some video games, ordered takeout, and started drinking beers. Just a normal night. Around midnight, Sam got a call from his girlfriend, something about a fight with her roommate, and he said he needed to go pick her up and smooth things over. "Hang here if you want," he said. "I'll be back in a bit." So, I stayed. I figured I'd chill, maybe watch some TV until he got back. Lisa was still awake, sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. When she saw me hanging around, she invited me to join her. "No point sitting alone in the kitchen," she said with a smile. It felt harmless at first, just a friendly chat. We talked about Sam, my job, and how weird it was being back in our hometown after trying to adult in the real world. But as the conversation went on, something shifted. She started opening up in a way she hadn't before, talking about how lonely it had been since the divorce, how difficult it was to find meaningful connections. "You get to a point where you wonder if it's even worth trying anymore," she said, swirling her wine. "You ever feel like that?" I nodded, not really knowing what to say. There was a heaviness in her voice, and it caught me off guard. I could tell she wasn't just venting. She was being real. And for some reason, I leaned into that vulnerability instead of pulling away. We sat there, the silence between us stretching longer than it should have. Then, she reached over and put her hand on mine. It was just a small gesture, simple, even, but it felt loaded. "You're a good guy," she said softly. "I hope you know that." I should have gotten up right then and walked away. I knew where this was heading, and every part of me was screaming to stop it before it started. But I didn't. I stayed. I don't know if it was the beer, the loneliness, or just the fact that she was beautiful and I was weak, but I leaned in, and she didn't pull away. We kissed, and from that moment, everything spiraled. One kiss led to another, and before I knew it, we were tangled up on the couch, making out like teenagers. My heart was racing, my mind screaming that this was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like I was watching someone else make all the bad decisions I knew I was about to regret. We ended up in her bedroom. It was fast and reckless, and the whole time, the guilt was clawing at the back of my mind. But I ignored it. I told myself I'd deal with it later. When it was over, we lay there in silence. I stared at the ceiling, feeling like the world was spinning off its axis. Lisa rolled over, gave me a small smile, and said, "This doesn't have to be complicated." But it was complicated. It was so complicated. I left before Sim got back. On the drive home, all I could think about was how badly I just screwed up. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that I'd pretend it never happened and go back to being normal. But of course, it didn't work out that way. A couple of days later, Lisa texted me. Nothing heavy, just, "Hey, I enjoyed the other night," smiley face. I knew I should have ignored it. I knew I should have stopped it before it got any worse. But I didn't. I texted her back. And just like that, we started seeing each other in secret. Every time Sam wasn't home, I'd end up at Lisa's house. It was reckless, thrilling, and every time I swore it would be the last time. But I kept going back. I was caught between the excitement of something forbidden and the crushing guilt of knowing I was betraying my best friend. Then it all came crashing down because of course it did. One afternoon, I was at Lisa's place. We were sitting on the couch, laughing about something dumb, when the front door opened. My heart stopped. Sam walked in, his face going from confusion to shock in a split second. He stared at us, piecing it together in real time. "You've got to be fucking kidding me," he whispered, his voice low and full of disbelief. I tried to explain, but what was there to say? "Sorry, man. I've been hooking up with your mom behind your back." There was no excuse, no apology that could make this right. Sam looked at me like I was a stranger. "Get out," he said quietly, his voice cold and final. "We're done." I left without another word. That was the last time I saw Sam. He blocked me on everything, texts, calls, social media. I tried reaching out, but it was pointless. I destroyed one of the most important relationships in my life. And for what? A few moments of stupidity and selfishness. As for Lisa, we never spoke again after that. It was like the whole thing vanished into thin air, like we both knew it was too messy to untangle, so we just let it end. It's been almost a year now, and the guilt still eats at me. I lost my best friend over a decision I knew was wrong from the start. And the worst part? I saw it coming and let it happen anyway. So yeah, that's my story. It's not something I'm proud of, and I don't expect anyone to understand. But if I've learned anything, it's that some mistakes come with a price you'll be paying for a long, long time. And once you cross a line like that, there's no going back. This happened 2 years ago when I was driving cross-country to move to a new city for a job. It was supposed to be a big adventure, a fresh start. I'd packed my whole life into my car and planned to drive for 3 days, splitting the trip between motels and rest stops along the way. Everything was fine at first. The highways were clear, the weather was perfect, and my favorite playlist kept me company. But somewhere in the middle of the second night, things took a turn. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles of open highway, with nothing but desert on either side. No streetlights, no towns, no signs of life, just the occasional tumbleweed skittering across the road. I've been driving for hours, and I was starting to feel the fatigue setting in. My eyes burned from staring at the endless road, and my body felt heavy with exhaustion. I knew I should pull over and rest, but I just wanted to get a little farther. That's when I saw the gas station. It was one of those old, rundown stations that looked like it had been built decades ago and never updated. A single pump sat under a flickering fluorescent light, and the building next to it had an old, open sign glowing weakly in the window. It looked like something out of a movie, a place people only stopped if they didn't have any other choice. I pulled in anyway. My gas gauge was hovering just above empty, and I figured it was better to fill up now than risk getting stranded in the middle of nowhere. The pump looked ancient, with peeling paint and a rusted nozzle, but it worked. I started fueling up and stretched my legs, glancing around the empty lot. That's when I noticed the car. It was parked at the far edge of the lot, just outside the glow of the station's flickering light. A beat-up old sedan, the kind of car that's more rust than metal, with its windows rolled down. But what really caught my attention was the fact that there was someone sitting in the driver's seat. The person wasn't moving, just sitting there, perfectly still, staring straight ahead. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was another traveler, someone resting before getting back on the road. But something about the way they were sitting rigid, motionless, made my skin crawl. I finished pumping the gas as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept glancing at the car, half expecting the person inside to move, but they didn't. They just sat there staring ahead like a statue. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The passenger door was open. Not fully, just a crack like someone had stepped out and left it ajar. And when I looked closer, I saw that the back seat was empty too. Like whoever had been sitting there had just left. The air felt suddenly heavy, like the night was pressing down on me. I grabbed the nozzle, slammed it back into the pump, and climbed into my car, my hands shaking. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at the sedan, and that's when the driver moved. Slowly, almost lazily, the figure turned their head toward me. Even from a distance, I could feel their gaze. It was cold, deliberate, and somehow wrong. Their face was shrouded in shadow, but I could make out the faint glint of their eyes, just barely catching the light from the gas station. They didn't blink, didn't smile, just stared. Then, without warning, the figure lifted one hand, slowly, and pointed at me. My stomach twisted into knots. Every instinct I had was screaming to get out of there. I slammed the key into the ignition, my heart racing, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I looked back one last time, and that's when I saw it. A second figure. They were standing just behind my car, right at the edge of the darkness. I hadn't seen them before. I have no idea where they came from. All I knew was that they were just standing there, still silent, watching me drive away. I floored it, my tires squealing as I shot back onto the highway, heart pounding in my chest. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting the sedan to pull out and follow me, but the road behind me stayed dark. It wasn't until I was miles down the highway that I let myself breathe again. The tightness in my chest eased slightly, but the fear didn't leave me. I knew what I'd seen, and I knew, deep down, that something had been waiting at that gas station. For the rest of the trip, I didn't stop. No more gas stations, no rest stops, no pulling over. I drove straight through the night, only stopping when I reached the safety of a crowded motel parking lot just before sunrise. Even then, I double-checked every door and window, making sure they were locked tight. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm driving late at night. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut, if I'd lingered at the gas station just a little longer. Whatever was waiting for me back there, I have a feeling it wasn't just looking for gas. This happened on a random Thursday night, and it's the kind of night that stays with you, even though nothing makes sense about it. I live in a small apartment on the edge of the city, just far enough from downtown that it's quiet at night, but close enough that you still hear the occasional siren or car speeding by. It was around 3 a.m., and I was wide awake, lying in bed, scrolling through my phone. You know that weird hour when the whole world feels off? When everything seems too quiet, and the air feels thick, like something's watching from just outside your line of sight. That's exactly how it felt that night. I kept scrolling, hoping I'd get sleepy soon, when I heard it, the softest knock at my front door. 3 knocks. They were so quiet that at first I thought I'd imagined them. But then they came again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not loud, not urgent, just patient. Now, my apartment is on the 2nd floor of a building that only has 6 units, and it's not the kind of place where people knock on your door at 3 a.m. No one comes by unannounced, and something about the knock felt wrong, like whoever was out there knew I was awake and was just waiting for me to open the door. I sat up in bed, heart racing. I thought about ignoring it, pretending I wasn't home, but then I realized something strange. My phone was still in my hand, but the screen had gone black. Dead. I'd had 40% battery just a few minutes earlier, but now it wouldn't even turn on. That's when the knocking started again. 3 knocks. Slow. Precise. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, every instinct screaming at me to stay put, but something pulled me toward the door. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep by the bed, just in case, and crept toward the front door as quietly as I could, trying not to make a sound. The hallway outside my apartment was silent. No footsteps, no shuffling, nothing. Just that awful, heavy silence pressing in from every direction. I leaned in close to the peephole, holding my breath, and looked outside. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. I stood there, staring through the peephole, confused and trying to shake off the fear crawling up my spine. I started to think that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe I was just overtired and my mind was playing tricks on me. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it from the shock. The screen was on now, and there was a new notification. A message from a number I didn't recognize. It was just one word, "Look." I stared at the message, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Slowly, against every bit of common sense I had left, I turned back to the peephole. And that's when I saw it. Someone was standing right outside my door. They weren't there a second ago. I know they weren't. But now, there they were, their face pressed right up against the peephole, their lips curled into the most horrible, twisted grin I've ever seen. Their eyes were wide and empty, like they'd been waiting their whole life just to be on the other side of my door. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped the bat. I backed away from the door, heart hammering, and tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. Then they knocked again. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. I didn't move. I just stood there, clutching the bat, waiting for something, anything to happen. But all I heard was the knocking. And then, the doorknob started to turn. It was slow, painfully slow, the metal rattling softly as if they were testing it, just to see how much time they had to play with me. I stared at the knob, paralyzed, knowing that I'd locked it before I went to bed, but not knowing if that would be enough. Suddenly, the knob stopped turning. There was a long, awful moment of silence. Then, through the door, I heard a whisper. "Not tonight." I don't know how, but I knew that if I opened that door, whatever was on the other side wouldn't just be waiting for me. It would follow me, and it wouldn't stop. I stood there for what felt like hours, frozen, waiting for the thing outside my door to leave. Eventually, the silence returned, and I didn't hear anything else. When the sun came up, I finally worked up the courage to unlock the door and look outside. The hallway was empty, just as empty as it had been the first time. But when I glanced down, my stomach dropped. There were footprints, wet, bare footprints leading from my door down the hallway and into the stairwell. I don't know where they came from, and I sure as hell don't know where they went. But I locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and didn't leave my apartment for 2 days. And now, every night before I go to bed, I double-check the locks. And I keep my phone charged just in case, because somehow I know that one night, they'll come back. And next time, they won't say, "Not tonight." This happened a couple of years ago, and I still can't explain it. I haven't told many people about it because, honestly, it sounds insane. But it felt real, too real to ignore. It was a cold autumn night, and I was driving back home after visiting some friends who live in a small town a few hours away. I took the back roads because they were faster and less traffic-heavy, and I kind of liked the quiet. There's something relaxing about driving alone at night with nothing but the hum of the engine and an old playlist on low volume. Everything was fine at first, just a long stretch of empty road, the occasional street light flickering overhead, and the trees swaying in the breeze. But then, out of nowhere, the GPS glitched. It told me to take a turn that wasn't on the map. At first, I thought it was just a shortcut, so I followed it. The road was narrow, and the deeper I went, the less familiar everything looked. The trees grew thicker on both sides, and the streetlights disappeared. There were no houses, no signs, just trees. I figured I must have taken a wrong turn and planned to loop back. Then after a few more minutes, I saw a house. It sat off the side of the road, just barely visible between the trees. It was old, with boarded-up windows and a porch that sagged under the weight of the years. The thing that made my stomach drop, though, was that every single light in the house was on. I slowed the car, unsure of what I was looking at. There was no reason for a place like that to have power. The whole area looked abandoned, but there it was, lights blazing like someone was waiting for me. That's when the GPS glitched again. It told me to turn right into the driveway of that house. I froze. The driveway was covered in dead leaves and overgrown weeds, like no one had driven up it in years. I knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. There was no way this was the right route. And then the car's radio turned on by itself. The volume was cranked all the way up, and all I could hear was static. I reached for the knob to turn it off, but just before I could, I heard something beneath the static. A voice, whispering. It wasn't clear, but I swear I heard it say, "You shouldn't have come here." I slammed the radio off and threw the car into reverse. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I backed up onto the road, I glanced at the house one more time, and that's when I saw someone standing on the porch. They weren't there a second ago. It was a figure, tall and motionless, standing just inside the porch light's glow. I couldn't make out their face. It was like the shadows were clinging to them, making them almost blurry. But they were watching me. I hit the gas and sped back the way I came, my hands shaking on the wheel. The GPS kept glitching, trying to make me turn back toward the house. The voice on the radio, if it was even real, echoed in my mind, "You shouldn't have come here." I drove for what felt like hours, taking random turns until, finally, the trees thinned, and I found myself back on a road I recognized. I pulled over at a gas station, hands still trembling, and checked the GPS on my phone. There was no sign of the route I'd taken. No strange turn, no hidden road, and definitely no house. I tried to tell myself it was just a glitch in the system, that my mind was playing tricks on me in the dark. But I know what I saw. I know that house was real. And the figure on the porch? It was waiting for me. I've never taken the back road since that night. I stick to the highways, no matter how long the drive. But every so often, late at night, I'll hear a faint crackle of static on the radio, just for a second. And every time it happens, I can't help but wonder, what if I had gone inside? We were together for 6 years. 6 years of inside jokes, late-night conversations, shared vacations, and all the little routines that make a relationship feel unbreakable. I thought I knew him better than anyone. I thought we were building a life together. One of those relationships where you fight over dumb things, but always come back stronger. I was wrong. It didn't hit all at once. There was no dramatic fight, no earth-shattering confession. It was a slow unraveling, so subtle that I almost didn't notice until it was too late. But looking back now, the signs were there all along. It started with the emotional distance. He used to tell me everything, work drama, weird conversations he'd overhear at the grocery store, random thoughts that popped into his head during the day. But slowly that changed. Conversations became shorter, shallower. I'd ask how his day was, and he'd shrug and say, "It was fine." No details, no jokes, no stories. Just fine. At first, I didn't think much of it. People go through phases, right? Stress, burnout life, it happens. I figured he'd snap out of it eventually. But then the little shifts became patterns. He stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped asking about my day. We used to cuddle every night before bed, but now, he'd roll over without a word, and I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I ever had. Then came the phone, because it's always the phone. He used to leave it lying around without a second thought, screen up, unlocked. But one day, he started keeping it on him at all times, as if it were glued to his hand. It was always face down, always on silent. If I asked who was texting, he'd give me vague answers like, "Oh, just work stuff," or "It's not important." It wasn't like I wanted to pry, but the change was impossible to ignore. I brought it up once, casually. "You've been kind of glued to your phone lately," I said, trying to keep things light. He gave me a quick smile, the kind you give when you're caught off guard. "It's just work," he said. "You know how it is." But I didn't know. I didn't know how it was. The late nights started soon after that. He worked a corporate job, one that sometimes required after-hours meetings. But suddenly, there was always a reason he had to stay late or grab drinks with coworkers. "I'll be home late," he'd text. And at first, I believed him. But the late nights started stacking up, and with every passing day, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. One night, I made his favorite dinner, something I hadn't done in a while because, honestly, I was trying to pull us back together. I thought, maybe this will help. Maybe this will remind us both of what we have. But when I told him about it, he texted back, "Can't make it home tonight, work thing." A work thing. Again, my heart sank. I sat at the table with 2 plates of food, untouched, and told myself I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. Then the accusation started, which was the strangest part of all. He began questioning me. "Who are you texting all the time?" He asked one day, as if I was the one being suspicious. "You've been acting weird lately, something I should know?" It caught me completely off guard. I wasn't hiding anything, and I hadn't changed a thing about my routine. But suddenly, I was the one under a microscope, the one being accused. And that's when it hit me. He's projecting. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. All the little changes, all the distance, the late nights, the phone secrecy. It wasn't just work stress. It was something else, someone else. I told myself I was being paranoid. I mean, we've been together for 6 years. He wouldn't do that to me, right? But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave, no matter how hard I tried to push it down. The night I found out the truth was a Wednesday. He told me he was going out for drinks with coworkers. "Don't wait up," he said with a quick kiss on my forehead, like it was an afterthought. Something inside me snapped. I waited until he was out the door, then opened the Find My app on my phone. We'd shared our locations for years, and I'd never once felt the need to check. But that night I did. He wasn't at the bar downtown like he said he'd be. He was at a hotel across town. I stared at the little dot on the map, blinking in disbelief. My heart was racing, my hands shaking, but I couldn't move. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a glitch, maybe. But deep down, I knew exactly what was happening. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I just sat on the couch, waiting for him to come home, feeling the walls of our life closing in around me. When the door finally clicked open sometime after 2 a.m., I didn't even look at him. "Hey," he mumbled, slipping off his shoes. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "How was the bar?" He froze for a second. Just a second. But it was enough. I saw the panic flicker in his eyes before he forced a smile. "It was fine. Same old." I stood up slowly, holding my phone in my hand. "You sure you were at the bar?" I asked, turning the screen toward him. "Because your location says you were at a hotel." His face drained of color. "It's not what it looks like," he whispered, but even he didn't sound convinced. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. "Then tell me what it is." He stammered for a moment, searching for an excuse, but there was nothing left to say. The silence between us was louder than anything. Finally, he sat down on the edge of the couch, rubbing his hands over his face. "How long?" I asked quietly. "For months," he admitted, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to happen. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't feel like mine. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated. "You've been lying to me for 4 months, and it just happened?" He looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you." But he already had, and no apology could ever take that back. I packed a bag that night. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just left. And as I walked out the door, the life we had built together crumbled behind me. The weeks that followed were brutal. I kept replaying every conversation, every missed sign, every time I told myself I was overreacting. But the truth was I knew. I knew all along. I just didn't want to believe it. If I've learned anything from this, it's that your gut is rarely wrong. When something feels off, it usually is. People can lie, manipulate, gaslight. But your instincts, they don't lie. Next time, I'll listen to that voice. Because love isn't supposed to make you feel crazy. Love isn't supposed to leave you waiting for someone to come home, wondering who they were with. And if it does, it's not love, it's betrayal in disguise. This is the story of how I almost died because of a vending machine. Yes, one of those snack-filled metal beasts that sit innocently in office buildings, luring you in with promises of convenience. It doesn't look dangerous. It's just a box with chips and candy bars. But let me tell you, those things have zero mercy. So, this was a few years back. I was at work, hungry as hell, and decided to treat myself to a little snack. The vending machine in our break room was ancient, like the kind of machine that only takes crumpled dollar bills if you smooth them out with the care of a heart surgeon. But I was starving and desperate for a Snickers, so I soldiered on. I fed the machine my dollar, punched in the code for my candy, and waited for that sweet, sweet satisfaction. The spiral hook thing twisted once, then twice, and then it stopped. The Snickers got stuck. Now, I'd seen this happen to other people before. Usually, they just sigh, accept their fate, and walk away. But not me. No, I was not about to let that machine take my money and deny me my chocolate. That wasn't going to happen. Not today. I've been having a crap morning already, and this Snickers was going to be the one good thing I had going for me. So, I gave the machine a little nudge. Nothing. I tried hitting the button again. Still nothing. That candy bar sat there, dangling on the edge of freedom, mocking me. I could practically hear it whisper, "Not today, buddy." At this point, I was getting angry. I figured if I just gave the machine a good shake, the bar would fall loose. I mean, how heavy could a vending machine be, right? Spoiler alert, heavier than I thought. I grabbed the sides of the machine and gave it a good shove. It rocked back a little, and the candy bar moved just a tiny bit closer to the edge. I thought, okay, one more good shake, and this thing is mine. Fueled by hunger and pure stubbornness, I gave the machine the hardest shove I could. And that's when I felt it. The vending machine, this towering metal box full of chips, sodas, and my precious Snickers, started to tip. For a split second, I thought, no way. There's no way this thing is actually falling. But it was tilting forward slow at first, and then picking up speed like it had decided it was going to end my life right then and there. I panicked and jumped back just as the entire machine came crashing down. It missed me by inches. I swear, I could feel the wind from it as it slammed into the floor with this deafening boom that shook the whole break room. I stood there, frozen, staring at the machine lying on its side, like I'd just escaped a Final Destination level death. And then, because the universe has a sixth sense of humor, the Snickers bar finally fell loose. It tumbled out of the slot and rolled onto the floor right in front of me like, "Here you go, champ. You earned it." I just stood there, heart pounding, trying to process how I'd almost died over a $1 candy bar. If I'd been a second slower, or if I hadn't jumped back in time, that machine would have flattened me. I could already see the headlines. Man crushed to death by vending machine in tragic snack-related incident. The worst part? One of my co-workers walked in right after the crash and saw me standing there, out of breath, surrounded by scattered chips and soda cans, holding the Snickers bar like it was a trophy. He just stared at me and said, "Dude, what the hell happened?" What could I say? The vending machine tried to kill me didn't sound believable. So I just shrugged, stuffed the Snickers in my pocket, and mumbled, "Long story." It took 2 maintenance guys and a dolly to get the machine upright again. No one ever asked me what happened, but I think they knew. I still see that vending machine every day, and it stares back at me like it remembers. To this day, I refuse to shake vending machines. If something gets stuck, I just take the loss and walk away. Because let me tell you, snacks aren't worth dying over. So, if you ever find yourself tempted to rock a vending machine, don't. Those things are heavy, unforgiving, and just waiting for someone to make one bad decision. It only takes 1 second to go from craving a candy bar to almost getting crushed to death. Life lesson. Sometimes the snack isn't worth it. This is the story of how I almost died because of a vending machine. Yes, one of those snack-filled metal beasts that sit innocently in office buildings, luring you in with promises of convenience. It doesn't look dangerous. It's just a box with chips and candy bars. But let me tell you, those things have zero mercy. So, this was a few years back. I was at work, hungry as hell, and decided to treat myself to a little snack. The vending machine in our break room was ancient, like the kind of machine that only takes crumpled dollar bills if you smooth them out with the care of a heart surgeon. But I was starving and desperate for a Snickers, so I soldiered on. I fed the machine my dollar, punched in the code for my candy, and waited for that sweet, sweet satisfaction. The spiral hook thing twisted once, then twice, and then it stopped. The Snickers got stuck. Now, I'd seen this happen to other people before. Usually they just sigh, accept their fate, and walk away. But not me. No, I was not about to let that machine take my money and deny me my chocolate. That wasn't going to happen. Not today. I've been having a crap morning already, and this Snickers was going to be the one good thing I had going for me. So, I gave the machine a little nudge. Nothing. I tried hitting the button again. Still nothing. That candy bar sat there, dangling on the edge of freedom, mocking me. I could practically hear it whisper, "Not today, buddy." At this point, I was getting angry. I figured if I just gave the machine a good shake, the bar would fall loose. I mean, how heavy could a vending machine be, right? Spoiler alert, heavier than I thought. I grabbed the sides of the machine and gave it a good shove. It rocked back a little, and the candy bar moved just a tiny bit closer to the edge. I thought, okay, one more good shake and this thing is mine. Fueled by hunger and pure stubbornness, I gave the machine the hardest shove I could. And that's when I felt it. The vending machine, this towering metal box full of chips, sodas, and my precious Snickers, started to tip. For a split second, I thought, no way. There's no way this thing is actually falling. But it was tilting forward slow at first, and then picking up speed, like it had decided it was going to end my life right then and there. I panicked and jumped back just as the entire machine came crashing down. It missed me by inches. I swear, I could feel the wind from it as it slammed into the floor with this deafening boom that shook the whole break room. I stood there, frozen, staring at the machine lying on its side, like I'd just escaped a Final Destination level death. And then, because the universe has a sixth sense of humor, the Snickers bar finally fell loose. It tumbled out of the slot and rolled onto the floor right in front of me like, here you go, champ. You earned it. I just stood there, heart pounding, trying to process how it almost died over a $1 candy bar. If I'd been a second slower, or if I hadn't jumped back in time, that machine would have flattened me. I could already see the headlines. Man crushed to death by vending machine in tragic snack-related incident. The worst part? One of my coworkers walked in right after the crash and saw me standing there, out of breath, surrounded by scattered chips and soda cans, holding the Snickers bar like it was a trophy. He just stared at me and said, "Dude, what the hell happened?" What could I say? The vending machine tried to kill me didn't sound believable. So I just shrugged, stuffed the Snickers in my pocket, and mumbled, long story. It took 2 maintenance guys and a dolly to get the machine upright again. No one ever asked me what happened, but I think they knew. I still see that vending machine every day, and it stares back at me like it remembers. To this day, I refuse to shake vending machines. If something gets stuck, I just take the loss and walk away. Because let me tell you, snacks aren't worth dying over. So, if you ever find yourself tempted to rock a vending machine, don't. Those things are heavy, unforgiving, and just waiting for someone to make one bad decision. It only takes 1 second to go from craving a candy bar to almost getting crushed to death. Life lesson: sometimes the snack isn't worth it. So, my first day? Absolute chaos. Think of every awkward situation you can imagine and multiply it by 10. I still have no idea how I survived that night without bursting into tears or spontaneously combusting from secondhand embarrassment. But hey, I made it through, and now it's one of those stories I can laugh about. Mostly. I was 22, working a dead-end retail job where my manager constantly forgot to put me on the schedule. I was struggling to keep up with bills, my credit cards were maxed out, and I was 1 step away from selling plasma just to survive. A friend of mine, well, more like an acquaintance, casually mentioned over drinks one night that she danced on weekends and pulled in serious cash. I figured she was exaggerating, but when she showed me her tips from one night, like $400 in cash, I couldn't believe it. I remember thinking, why the hell am I folding t-shirts for minimum wage when I could be doing that? After a few nights of thinking it over and checking my bank balance for the millionth time, I decided to give it a shot. I Googled a few clubs, called one that didn't look too sketchy, and talked to the manager, a guy named Ricky. He told me I could start the same night if I wanted, as long as I had heels and a smile. That's literally what he said. I didn't own stripper heels, so I threw on the tallest pair of boots I had and hoped for the best. I found a black bra and some matching underwear that sort of looked like lingerie, did my makeup way too heavy, and stared at myself in the mirror thinking, what the hell am I doing? But rent was due in 5 days, so I didn't have time to overthink it. I grabbed my coat, stuffed some lip gloss into my purse, and off I went. When I arrived at the club, I was shaking so hard it felt like my legs might give out. The place was dimly lit, the kind of place where the neon lights flicker a little, but it didn't feel unsafe. Ricky greeted me at the door, slick back hair, gold chain, the whole trying too hard vibe, and waved me inside like I was walking into a family barbecue. You ready to make some money, sweetheart? He asked, flashing a grin that was a little too big. I smiled and nodded, though inside, I was dying. The dressing room was already buzzing with girls getting ready. They were all gorgeous and confident, like they'd been doing this forever. One girl with bright blue hair gave me a once-over and said, "First night, I just nodded, feeling completely out of place. She grinned. "Don't worry, babe. It's a mess at first, but you'll figure it out. Just smile and don't trip." Great. The same advice as Ricky. I was sensing a theme. Before I knew it, the DJ called my name while my stage name. I had panicked earlier when Ricky asked what I wanted to be called and blurted out Luna. Why? Nokudo. It sounded vaguely mysterious, and I thought it might make me feel more confident. Spoiler, it didn't. I stepped onto the stage, blinded by the lights, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The music started, some slow, sensual beat, and I gripped the pole like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I tried to do a spin, but my hand slipped, and I ended up doing this weird half-twirl, half-stumble. One of the guys in the front row gave me a little smirk, and I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. But then I remembered what Blue Hair Girl had said, just smile. So I plastered on the best fake smile I could manage and kept moving. I swayed awkwardly, flipped my hair, and tried to look like I knew what I was doing. By some miracle, a few singles landed on the stage. Probably pity tips, but at that point I didn't care. I scooped them up like I'd just won the lottery and ran off stage as soon as the music ended. Back in the dressing room, Blue Hair was waiting for me, grinning like she'd just watched the funniest thing ever. "See? Not so bad, right?" she teased, handing me a shot of tequila. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I downed it anyway, hoping it would calm my nerves. The rest of the night was a blur. I managed to offer a few lap dances, awkward as hell, but the guys were mostly harmless. One customer was this quiet guy in a baseball cap who kept saying, "You're doing great," like I was a kid at her first piano recital. It was weird, but honestly kind of sweet. He tipped me $50, which felt like $1,000,000 at that point. Of course, not every customer was that nice. One guy, mid-40s, smelled like whiskey and bad cologne, tried to grab my thigh during a dance. I moved his hand away and gave him my best "don't even try it" look, but he just grinned and said, "Come on, sweetheart, loosen up." I ended the dance early and walked away, my heart racing. I told Ricky about it later, expecting him to say something like, "Toughen up, it comes with the job." But instead, he just shrugged and said, "Yeah, some guys suck." Good call, ending the dance. It wasn't exactly comforting, but at least I knew I wouldn't get in trouble for setting boundaries. By the time my shift ended, I was physically and emotionally drained. My feet were killing me, my thighs were sore, and my brain felt like it had been put through a blender. But when I counted my tips, $2.10, I felt this weird sense of pride. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that I'd faced one of my biggest fears and made it through to the other side. Walking out of the club that night, the cold air hitting my face, I felt different. Not invincible or anything like that, just stronger. Like I'd proven something to myself. Yeah, I'd stumbled and made a fool of myself, but I'd also learned how to roll with it. And that felt good. I went back the next night, and the night after that. It got easier. I learned how to move without feeling like a robot, how to flirt without cringing, and how to dodge the creeps before they even sat down. I started making real money, enough to pay my rent and finally breathe a little. I only danced for about 6 months, but those 6 months changed me. I learned how to set boundaries, how to hustle, and how to carry myself with confidence, even when I didn't feel it. So yeah, my first night was a mess, but it was also the start of something that made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. This happened last winter, just after New Year's. I was staying at my parents' house for the holidays, which is out in the country, a small house on a few acres of land, surrounded by trees and fields. It's the kind of place where the nearest neighbor is a mile down the road, and at night, the only thing you hear is the wind. I grew up there, so I'm used to the quiet. It never really bothered me. In fact, I found it relaxing after living in the city for a few years. That night, though, something about the quiet felt different. Off. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up for no particular reason. I wasn't having a bad dream, and I wasn't thirsty or anything. I just woke up. The room was dark, with the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. I lay there for a moment, listening to the wind outside, trying to figure out what had disturbed me. That's when I heard it, a faint knocking sound. It wasn't loud, more like someone tapping gently on glass. I sat up, straining to hear, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. Now, here's the thing. My parents' house is a single story, but the windows in the bedrooms are high off the ground. Too high for someone to knock on unless they were standing on something, or unless they were really tall. My heart started to race. I tried to tell myself it was just a branch from the tree outside brushing against the window, but the taps were too deliberate, too rhythmic. It sounded like a person trying to be quiet, like they didn't want to wake the whole house. I reached over to grab my phone from the nightstand, but my hand froze halfway there. From the corner of my eye, I saw something, a shape. There was someone outside the window. At first, all I could see was a vague silhouette, standing perfectly still in the pale moonlight. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the outline of a figure, a head, shoulders, and arms, just barely visible behind the glass. They weren't moving, just standing there, waiting. And then, slowly, the figure tilted its head to the side, like it was trying to get a better look at me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I reached for my phone again, this time without taking my eyes off the window, and fumbled to unlock it with trembling hands. But just as I opened the screen to call someone, anyone, the tapping stopped. I stared at the window, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen, for the figure to move, for the sound to come back. But there was nothing, just the pale moonlight and the empty stretch of glass. For a moment, I thought maybe the figure had been a shadow, a trick of the light, a weird shape from the tree branches outside. But as I leaned closer, something cold and terrifying caught my eye. A handprint. It was faint but unmistakable, a single, smudged handprint pressed against the glass, right where the figure's head had been. The shape of the palm and fingers was long, too long like the hand didn't belong to a person. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My parents were sound asleep in their room, and I didn't want to wake them, so I sat in the living room with all the lights on, my heart racing, staring at the hallway like something might follow me. The rest of the night was a blur. I must have passed out on the couch at some point because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was pouring through the windows, and everything felt normal. But when I went back to my room, the handprint was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the clean, empty window, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. That the figure outside, the handprint, it had all just been a dream. But deep down, I knew better. Something or someone had been outside my window that night. I didn't tell my parents what happened. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy, and honestly, I didn't want them to worry. But the next night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that room again. I stayed in the living room, every light in the house on, until morning. Even now, months later, I think about that night. I think about the handprint, about the way the figure tilted its head, like it was curious. I haven't gone back to visit my parents since. I keep telling myself I'll go soon, maybe for Thanksgiving or Christmas. But every time I think about sleeping in that room, a knot forms in my stomach, and I make up some excuse not to go. Because whatever was outside my window that night, I have a feeling it wasn't just passing. This happened a few weeks ago, and even now, I feel like I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. You ever have one of those nights where everything feels off, like you've stepped out of reality just a little bit? That's exactly what it felt like. And no matter how hard I try to convince myself it was just in my head, I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened that night was real. It was a Thursday, and I'd been working late. I run deliveries part-time, mostly just driving packages around the city to make some extra cash. I don't mind the night shifts. It's usually quiet, fewer people on the road, and I can zone out with music while I drive. But this night was different. I just finished my last drop-off around 11 p.m., and I was driving back through a part of town I didn't know too well. The streets were narrow, and the houses were old. Those old Victorian-style homes with sagging porches and peeling paint. There were no streetlights, and the whole area was blanketed in a thick fog that made it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. As I drove, I noticed that my GPS had glitched out. The map was frozen, showing me stuck in the middle of a blank space with no streets or landmarks. I figured I'd just drive straight until I hit a main road, so I kept going, the tires crunching over the wet pavement. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the fog, barely visible in the beams of my headlights, was a figure standing on the side of the road. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing the street as if they were waiting for something. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, but the closer I got, the more I realized something was off. The figure was wearing a long, black coat, soaked through with rain or mist. Their head was tilted down, so I couldn't see their face. And their hands, oh man, their hands were too long. Way too long. They dangled down past their knees, the fingers thin and bony, almost dragging on the ground. I should have kept driving. I knew I should have, but something about the figure held me, like an invisible hook had sunk into my mind. Without thinking, I slowed the car to a crawl as I approached. The figure didn't move. Not at all. As I rolled past them, I glanced out my passenger window, hoping for a better look. And that's when they turned their head. I wish I could forget what I saw. I wish I could erase it from my brain, but it's burned into my memory. Their face was wrong. It wasn't a person's face. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were all slightly off, like someone had drawn a face from memory and got every detail just a little wrong. And their eyes, God, those eyes, they were wide and empty, like they'd seen too much and nothing at all. And the smile, it stretched slowly across their face, too wide, as if they'd been waiting for me. I slammed on the gas, heart pounding in my chest, and sped past the figure. The car roared forward, tires skidding on the wet pavement as I tore down the road, the fog swallowing everything behind me. I gripped the wheel, so tight my knuckles turned white, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. But there was nothing, or at least, I thought there was nothing. Then I saw it, a shape, sitting in the back seat of my car. At first, it was just a shadow, a dark smudge in the rearview mirror. But as I stared, it became clearer. Someone, or something, was sitting back there, hunched over, watching me through the reflection. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't picked anyone up. I knew the back seat had been empty. And yet there it was sitting silently, waiting. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't want to see it directly. I just kept driving, praying I'd hit the highway soon, praying that whatever was in the back seat would disappear when I reached the city lights. But it didn't. Every few seconds, I glanced in the mirror, hoping the shadow would be gone. But it was still there, still sitting perfectly still, its too wide smile visible in the dim reflection. Then it spoke. It wasn't a normal voice. It was low and soft, like someone whispering from the bottom of a well. I could barely understand the words, but I heard enough to freeze my blood. "Almost home," it whispered. That was it. I floored the gas, flying down the narrow streets as fast as I dared. The car rattled beneath me, the tires screeching on every turn, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. Finally, I saw the glow of the highway ahead. Relief flooded through me, and I sped toward it, my hands trembling on the wheel. As soon as I hit the on-ramp, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, praying the shadow would be gone. And it was. The back seat was empty, just as it should have been. No shadow, no figure, nothing but the faint smell of damp earth lingering in the air. I drove straight home, parked in my driveway, and sprinted inside without looking back. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch with all the lights on, clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe it was a trick of the fog and the dark. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. What would I say? Hey, I gave a ride to a nightmare in the backseat of my car? No one would believe me. But every time I get into my car now, I check the back seat. I know it's stupid, but I can't help it. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I catch a glimpse of something in the mirror. Just for a second, a shadow, a shape, a smile that doesn't belong. And every time I do, I hear it again. Almost home. This one's hard to talk about. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, wondering how I let things get so out of hand. Even now, it feels like it was someone else making all those bad decisions. But it was me. It was about a year ago. I was 26, stuck in that awkward phase where everyone around you seems to have their life figured out, and you're just drifting. My best friend, Nate, was one of the few constants in my life. We'd known each other since we were kids, more like brothers than friends. His family practically adopted me, especially after my parents split. Nate's house was where I went to escape, to feel normal. And his mom, Claire, was always kind to me. Claire was the cool mom, the kind of woman who could connect with anyone. She was funny, down to earth, and sharp as hell. She had this effortless beauty, too tall, fit, with these piercing green eyes. She always seemed younger than her age, and she knew how to carry herself with that kind of confidence that makes people take notice. But she was Nate's mom, and that made her untouchable. Or, at least she was supposed to be. It all started on a random night when Nate invited me over to his place. We planned to have a movie night, just hang out like old times. But Nate got caught up at work and texted me to say he'd be a couple of hours late. "My mom's home though," he said. "She'll let you in." I drove over, not thinking much of it. When I got there, Claire greeted me with her usual smile, and we ended up sitting in the kitchen, drinking a couple of beers while we waited for Nate. The conversation flowed easily. She asked how life was going, and I gave her the usual vague answers. It's fine, just figuring things out. But Claire saw right through me. She always had a way of doing that. "You've been stuck for a while," she said, tilting her head as she looked at me. "Like you're waiting for something to click, but it hasn't yet." It hit me harder than I expected. I laughed it off, but it was the truth. I was stuck, feeling like life was moving around me, and I wasn't going anywhere. Claire gave me a soft smile. "It's okay, you know. Everyone feels like that at some point." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. It was a friendly gesture. At least that's what I told myself. But her hand stayed there, and suddenly everything felt different. The air between us got heavier, like we both realized something had shifted, but neither of us wanted to acknowledge it. I should have stood up, made some excuse to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed. We kept talking about life, relationships, loneliness, and the conversation started drifting into places it shouldn't have. She told me how hard it was being single again after all these years, how she hadn't felt connected to anyone in a long time. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes it's nice just having someone to talk to. Someone who really listens." She gave me this look, gentle, almost vulnerable, and before I knew what I was doing, I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't planned. It just happened, like my brain had shut off and my body was running on autopilot. For a split second, I thought she'd pull away, tell me it was a mistake. But she didn't. She kissed me back, and everything escalated from there. One kiss turned into two, and before I knew it, we were in her living room, hands everywhere, breathing heavy. We didn't even make it to the bedroom the first time. It was wild and messy, and the whole time, this voice in the back of my head was screaming, "What the hell are you doing?" But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to. Afterward, we lay on the couch, catching our breath. Claire turned to me with a small, sad smile. "This doesn't have to mean anything," she whispered. "We don't have to make it complicated." I nodded, but I knew better. It was already complicated. I left before Nate got home that night, telling myself it was a one-time thing, just a stupid mistake fueled by too many beers and too much loneliness. But a few days later, Claire texted me. It was simple. "It was nice the other night. Maybe we can do it again sometime." I knew it was a bad idea. I knew I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But I went back anyway. And then I went back again. It became this secret thing between us. Whenever Nate wasn't around, I'd find myself at Claire's house. It wasn't just about the physical stuff, either. We talked, laughed, shared things we probably shouldn't have. It felt good, too good. And every time I told myself it was the last time, I'd find myself right back at her door. The guilt ate away at me, though. Every time I saw Nate, I felt like a fraud. He had no idea what was going on right under his nose. I'd sit across from him, pretending everything was normal, while the weight of the secret between us grew heavier and heavier. And then one night, it all blew up. Nate came home early. I was at Claire's house, sitting on the couch with her, and the second the front door opened, I knew we were screwed. My heart dropped into my stomach as Nate walked in, his face shifting from confusion to anger in a split second. "What the fuck?" he said, his voice sharp and filled with disbelief. I jumped off the couch, scrambling to explain, but there was nothing I could say that would make it right. Nate looked at me like he didn't even recognize me. "You're hooking up with my mom?" he whispered, like the words didn't even feel real coming out of his mouth. I tried to apologize, but he cut me off. "Get the hell out," he said, his voice low and trembling with rage. We're done. And just like that, the friendship I thought would last a lifetime was over. I left that night, and I haven't spoken to Nate since. He blocked me on everything: phone, social media, the whole deal. I tried to reach out once or twice, but he never responded. And honestly, I don't blame him. Claire and I never talked after that either. It was like the whole thing just vanished. But the guilt stayed. It still does. It's been a year now, and I think about it all the time. How easily I threw away a decade of friendship for something that never should have happened in the first place. I ruined everything for a few moments of weakness. So yeah, that's my story. It's not something I'm proud of, and I don't expect anyone to understand. I knew it was wrong from the start, and I did it anyway. And now, I have to live with the fallout. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some mistakes leave scars you can't see, but they never really fade. And once you cross a line like that, there's no going back. This happened last winter, and I still can't explain it. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. Everything about it was too real. And to this day, I wish I could just forget the whole thing. It was around 11 p.m., and I was coming back from my parents' house after Sunday dinner. It had snowed earlier in the day, and the roads were slick, but I wasn't in a rush. I'd taken this route 100 times before, a long, two-lane road that cut through some wooded areas and farmland. It was quiet, peaceful, until it wasn't. About halfway home, I noticed something strange. There was a car parked on the side of the road, hazards flashing. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much of it, but there was no one inside. Just the car, engine running, door wide open, and the hazard lights blinking in the dark. I slowed down, debating whether to pull over and help. But something about it made me hesitate. The door wasn't just open, it looked like someone had left in a hurry. The driver's seat was empty, but the headlights were aimed into the woods, like whoever had been in the car had run straight into the trees. I decided to keep driving. Something in my gut told me that whatever was going on, I didn't want to be part of it. A few minutes later, I saw another car. Same situation, parked on the side of the road, door open, hazards blinking. But this time, the back door was open too, and it looked like the seatbelt had been torn, frayed at the edges like someone had ripped it off in a panic. I tried to shake the unease creeping over me, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe both cars belonged to people who knew each other, and they'd gone off together for some reason. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. The snow started falling again, and the road ahead looked darker than it should have, like the forest on either side was swallowing the light from my headlights. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting the urge to turn around and take another route. But I was almost home, just 15 more minutes, and I'd be out of the woods. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the icy pavement. My heart jumped into my throat as the car slid to a stop just a few feet from them. I stared, my breath fogging up the inside of the windshield. It was a woman, or at least it looked like a woman. She was wearing a thin dress, way too light for the freezing temperature, and her hair hung in wet strands over her face. Her bare feet were planted firmly in the snow, and her head was tilted at a strange angle, like she was listening for something. I rolled down the window just a crack. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice shaky. She didn't move. She just stood there, her head tilted, as if she didn't hear me at all. And then, slowly, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wrong, too wide, too slow, like someone who was trying to remember how to mimic human expression. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there. I threw the car into reverse, my tires slipping on the ice, and as I backed away, she started walking toward me. Her movements were jerky, like her limbs didn't quite fit together right. I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas, speeding past her as fast as I could. As I flew down the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. She wasn't alone. There were more figures coming out of the woods, tall, thin shapes, their faces hidden in the dark, all moving toward the road. They walked slowly, deliberately, like they knew I had nowhere to go. I pressed the gas pedal harder, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The road ahead was a blur of snow and shadows, and I kept glancing at the mirror, terrified that I'd see them following me. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the road was clear. No figures, no strange cars, just the empty road stretching ahead of me. I didn't stop driving until I got home. I pulled into my driveway, shut off the engine, and sat there in silence, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I'd been tired. Maybe the snow had played tricks on my eyes. But when I looked at my phone, I realized something was wrong. The drive that should have taken me 45 minutes had taken 2 hours. I don't know what happened out there. I don't know who or what those figures were. But ever since that night, I've taken a different route home. And every time I see hazard lights on the side of the road, I drive a little faster. Because whatever I saw that night, it was waiting for me. Story 30. We were together for almost 8 years. At that point, it felt like we had built a life that was unshakable. You don't spend nearly a decade with someone and expect it all to crumble overnight. Or at least I didn't. I thought we were in it for the long haul, planning trips, talking about having kids one day, tossing around the idea of buying a house. It was all so ordinary, so comfortable, and maybe that's why I didn't see it coming. I thought we were safe. The changes started small. Isn't that always how it goes? Just little things at first. Nothing you'd sound the alarm over. He became more distracted, more distant. He used to tell me everything about his day, his annoying coworker, the random conversations he overheard in line at Starbucks. But somewhere along the way, the little updates stopped. He'd come home, kiss me on the cheek, mumble, work was fine, and then disappear into his phone. The phone. That was the first real sign, but I ignored it. He used to leave it lying around, no password, no problem. But now it was always locked, always close by, always face down. If it buzzed and I glanced at it, he'd snatch it up like it was some top-secret document. Work stuff, he'd say, brushing me off. At first, I didn't question it. I trusted him. 8 years together. Why wouldn't I? But the way he acted around that phone made my stomach twist. And the more I tried to tell myself it was nothing, the harder it became to believe it. Then came the sudden gym obsession. Now, he was never a gym guy. We used to laugh about how the most exercise we got was walking to the nearest food truck. But out of nowhere, he was hitting the gym 5 days a week. He'd come home late, sweaty, saying things like, I needed to clear my head. He started buying new clothes, too, nicer ones, clothes he'd never worn from me. When I asked him about it, trying to keep things light, he just shrugged. I want to feel good, he said. Nothing wrong with that, right? There wasn't, at least not on the surface. But something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was missing something, like I was on the outside of a joke I didn't know I was part of. The intimacy disappeared next. The little kisses, the playful touches, the lazy Sunday mornings tangled in bed. All of it just stopped. He'd pull away when I reached for him, say he was too tired, too stressed. I told myself it was just a phase. That long-term relationships go through dry spells. But the more I reached out, the further he drifted away. One night, we were lying in bed, and I asked him point blank, "Are you happy?" He rolled over, his back to me. "Of course," he said. "Why wouldn't I be?" But the way he said it didn't sound convincing. Not to me, not even to him. Then came the accusations, out of nowhere. One day, he started questioning me. "You've been distant lately," he said. "Is there something you need to tell me?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. "What? No. What's going on with you?" He shrugged, but there was this weird look in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. I just think maybe we're not as close as we used to be. It felt like a slap. I was the one fighting to keep us together, the one bending over backward, trying to connect with him. And here he was, making me feel like I was the problem. It was surreal, like I'd stepped into some alternate reality where everything was backward. That's when I realized he was projecting. The thought hit me like ice water in my veins. He was acting guilty because he was guilty. And yet, I still didn't want to believe it. I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, because that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them, even when everything in your gut is screaming not to. The night I found out the truth was one I'll never forget. He told me he was going out for drinks with coworkers. "Don't wait up," he said, throwing on a shirt I hadn't seen in years, the one I always told him he looked amazing in. After he left, I sat on the couch, my heart pounding. I tried watching TV, scrolling through my phone, but that nagging feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I opened the location sharing app on my phone. We'd shared our locations for years. More out of convenience, than anything else. I never thought I'd actually use it. When his location popped up, my heart dropped. He wasn't at the bar. He was at a hotel across town. I stared at the blinking dot on the screen, frozen. My mind raced with every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. I wanted to believe there was an innocent reason for him to be there. But deep down, I knew. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I just waited. And when he came home, well, after 2 a.m., reeking of alcohol and perfume, I was sitting on the couch, waiting. He froze when he saw me. "You're still up?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked just enough to give him away. "How was the bar?" I asked quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "Good. Same old." I held up my phone, the location tracker still open. "Try again." His face went pale. For a moment, he looked like he might try to lie, but then his shoulders sagged, and he sat down on the edge of the couch. "It's not what you think," he mumbled. I laughed, a bitter sound that didn't feel like mine. "It's exactly what I think." He didn't even try to deny it. He just sat there, head in his hands, and whispered, "I didn't mean for it to happen." "How long?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Almost a year," he admitted, barely audible. "A year. A whole year of lies, of late nights and gym sessions and phone secrecy. A whole year of him coming home to me while sharing pieces of himself with someone else." I felt numb. The anger, the heartbreak, they didn't hit right away. I just stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The next morning, I told him to move out. He didn't fight me. He knew there was no fixing this. The damage was done. It's been months now, and I'm still picking up the pieces. Some days, it feels like I'm drowning in what-ifs. What if I confronted him sooner? What if I'd seen the signs earlier? But the truth is, I saw them. I just didn't want to believe them. If I've learned anything, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels off, it is off. People will lie to your face, twist the truth, make you feel like you're the crazy one. But deep down, you always know. Next time, if there ever is a next time, I won't ignore the signs. Because love isn't supposed to leave you feeling like a detective in your own relationship. And if it does, it's not love, it's betrayal dressed up as affection.